Hey guys, tonight we begin with the bizarre laws of Hammurabi, where one wrong move could mean a missing hand. A sunken boat might cost you your children, and justice came carved in stone, not spoken in mercy. So, while you're getting comfortable, feel free to tap like and subscribe if this kind of calm, late-night history is your thing. And I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop a comment with your city and what time it was when you pressed play. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun hasn't risen yet, but someone is already banging on your door. Not gently either. The kind of banging that says, this isn't a social visit, and it's coming from a man with a shaved head, dusty robe, and a clay tablet tucked under one arm. You groan, swing your feet out from under the woven blanket, and already regret waking up, because you know exactly what this is. You've been summoned to court. You try to act surprised as he reads your name out loud, but it's not convincing. You've been expecting this ever since that argument over a loan turned into an accusation of theft. It's hard to remember who said what anymore, whether it was really theft or just loud negotiating with a misplaced doubt. But in Hammurabi's Babylon, nuance is not your friend. You're not walking into a courtroom with lawyers and sympathetic juries. You're walking into a place where justice has a very sharp edge and very little patience. As you follow the court officer through narrow streets, the city is already waking up. Vendors mutter over their wares. Women carry baskets balanced on their heads, and children dart between buildings like sand-colored lizards. The early morning air smells like dry earth, roasting chickpeas, and faint sewage. You catch a glimpse of the temple tower in the distance, ziggurat tiers reaching skyward, and try not to imagine what kind of punishment gets handed out from a courtroom built in its shadow. Eventually, you're led into the temple precinct, a complex of stone walls, open courtyards, and shadowed doorways where you can already hear voices raised in judgment. The courtroom isn't much more than a shaded hall with a packed clay floor, but it carries a heavy silence that hushes even the pigeons. Reed mats line the edges for the elders, scribes, and anyone important enough not to stand. Everyone else, meaning you, gets to wait barefoot in the dust. The moment you step inside, every eye turns. It's not a big space, but it feels cavernous with all that staring. Your accuser is already here, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, lips curling into the smug expression of someone who believes the law is firmly on their side. You're shown where to stand, just a few steps from the front, close enough to see the judge's eyes, and wonder if they're in a good mood today. You try to keep still, try to avoid fidgeting as the charges are read aloud. The words are formal and ancient, chanted more than spoken, and you catch only fragments. Goat, property, false words, recompense. Every syllable seems to weigh more than the last. Somewhere behind the judge, a scribe is already scratching notes into a clay tablet, and the sound of his stylus, tiny pokes and scratches, is the only noise in the room besides your pounding heart. Then comes the part you dreaded, your turn to speak. The judge leans forward, hands folded, waiting. You clear your throat, begin your defense, and instantly regret your choice of words. You stumble over dates, forget which witness said what, and the more you talk, the more the judge's expression flattens. It's not going well. It never does for people like you. Your accuser, a man with better sandals and cleaner robes, nods with each mistake you make, as if the entire courtroom is a play, and you're reciting the wrong lines. You glance briefly at the edge of the room, where a tall black stele stands silently. It's impossible to ignore. Covered in rows of wedge-shaped writing, topped with a carved image of Hammurabi, receiving the law from the sun god Shamash, it looms like a warning. Those aren't decorations on it. They're punishments. Hundreds of them, etched in stone, promising swift and severe consequences. You suddenly remember that one law: if someone accuses another of a crime and the accused is found guilty, they're punished. But if the accusation was false, the accuser gets the punishment instead. Justice, yes, but razor-edged. The judge motions for silence, and just like that, your part is over. Now it's in his hands. You lower your gaze, sweaty palms clenched tight, and try not to think about what comes next. Your fate isn't carved yet, but it's close. All it would take is a nod and a word, and you could be fined, beaten, exiled, or worse. But before that happens, there's still one final hope, one strange ritual that might tip the scales. You've heard the stories. When the facts are murky and the judge is uncertain, there's a backup plan written into the code itself. One that involves sacred water and the gods deciding whether you float or drown. And that's exactly what the judge is about to propose. The judge's voice rings out through the chamber, and although you don't quite catch every word, the meaning is unmistakable. The room shifts. Your accuser stiffens. A few people murmur. You're being offered the ordeal, the river test, the sacred trial of truth. And just like that, the spotlight moves from your mouth to your soul, or, more accurately, to your ability to stay afloat in a muddy current. You're escorted out of the temple by two court assistants, neither of whom seem particularly concerned with whether you're guilty or innocent. Their job isn't to worry. Their job is to get you to the edge of the Euphrates without letting you run away. One walks ahead with the measured gait of someone used to this ritual. The other stays behind you, silent, except for the occasional throat clearing that feels more like a warning than a nervous tick. The city is alive now, and as you move through its streets, you can feel the weight of its rhythm. Clay jars being loaded onto carts, potters squatting in doorways, women shouting over baskets of garlic and onions. You pass a shrine where incense curls lazily around a painted statue of Ishtar, and for the first time today, you whisper a small prayer, not to win, just to live. At the riverbank, a crowd has already started to form. It's not every day someone gets the ordeal. It's special in a grim, ceremonial sort of way, equal parts public shaming and divine roulette. The officiant is there, of course in his striped priestly robe, murmuring words to the gods. There's also a reed mat, a clay pot filled with holy water, and two assistants holding a rope that looks suspiciously like it has been used more than once. You wonder if it's still damp from the last trial. They ask you to remove your outer robe, then your sandals. The river is sluggish this morning, full of silt and reeds, and its surface gleams under the soft morning sun like polished copper. It looks peaceful, but you know how deceptive that can be. You've heard the stories, how even strong swimmers don't always come back. Sometimes the river takes the innocent. Sometimes the guilty float. But no one argues with the river's decision, because it isn't about physics. It's about belief. You're led to the edge, your feet sinking slightly in the wet clay. The officiant lifts his arms, calling on the gods to judge you. The rope is looped around your waist, not to save you, but to pull you out if the water decides you're guilty. Or if you float too long, and someone decides the gods might be getting bored. You try not to notice the broken bits of pottery at the river's edge, or the half-buried sandals stuck in the mud. And then they push. You hit the water with a splash that's colder than expected. It fills your ears, your nose, your mouth. For a terrifying second, you forget how to breathe. You kick, flail, surface. The crowd cheers or gasps, you can't tell which, and the current tugs at you like an impatient judge. You try to stay calm, to make it look effortless, like truth lives in your lungs. But the water wants something from you, and your limbs are already tired. You bob once, twice, then catch the edge of a rock hidden beneath the surface. It gives you a moment's hold, enough to gasp for air and scan the crowd. Their faces blur, but you see the priest nod. You're still afloat. You haven't sunk, which could mean anything. To the gods, it might say innocent. To the judge, it might say crafty. And to your accuser, it might say, "Not guilty, for now." They pull you out, breathless and dripping. The rope leaves a red mark around your waist, and your hands shake as you sit on the bank, teeth chattering. You're offered a reed mat to sit on and a scrap of cloth to dry off, but no one speaks to you. Not yet. The officiant is deep in thought, or perhaps deep in pretending to be deep in thought. Eventually, the judge arrives, not with a fanfare, but with a steady pace and a solemn expression. He looks at the priest. The priest gives a slight nod. The judge says nothing, just gestures for you to return to the temple. It's a silent verdict. No cheers, no declarations. But your legs still work, and your head is still on your shoulders. So you guess you're innocent. Back in the courtroom, your accuser is no longer smug. In fact, he looks a little worried. After all, if the river says you didn't do it, maybe that means he did. And now the stone comes into play, a massive, black, unblinking stele that has stood in this room longer than any living man. It's taller than a person and shaped like a thumb pressing into the earth. The top shows Hammurabi himself receiving divine authority, and below that, row after row of tiny symbols etched into the stone's surface like lines in a poem. This is the code. Every crime, every punishment, every strange clause about oxen, builders, wives, debts, and beer. It's all there, locked in basalt. You stare at it now, chest still heaving, water trickling down your back. You can't read a word of it, but that doesn't matter. No one expects you to. That's what the scribes are for, and the scribes never forget. You hear your name again. The judge begins reciting something that starts with, "If a man," which is almost always a bad sign. Your eyes stay locked on the statue carved at the top of the stone. Hammurabi sits like a god himself, receiving the law from Shamash, the sun deity. His hands are folded. His beard is perfect. His eyes don't blink. And in this moment, it feels like he's staring directly at you. The judge's voice continues, echoing off the walls, and you realize this isn't over yet. The ordeal might have spared you from drowning, but it hasn't protected you from punishment. The code is full of options. And somewhere in those 282 laws, there's one that still applies to you. The next words out of the judge's mouth will decide which one. The judge's voice is like slow thunder, controlled, deliberate, and heavy with implications. You hear your name again, this time accompanied by an official decree. You are to take an oath. Not a casual one either. Not the kind you might mutter under your breath after a few too many beers. No, this is a proper, God-invoking, fate-binding Mesopotamian oath, and it must be done before the gods, the crowd, and the stone-eyed stele that never forgets. You're motioned forward, closer to the base of the black monument. The heat radiating off the stone makes the air shimmer. Your wet tunic sticks to your skin as you place your right hand on a clay tablet covered in divine names. You don't know half of them. Maybe no one does anymore. But the priest standing beside you certainly does, and his solemn, rhythmic chanting makes it very clear that this isn't for show. You repeat after him, syllable by syllable, promising that you did not steal, lie, conspire, or offend. You swear by Shamash the sun, Marduk the Lord, and half a dozen other divine bureaucrats you wouldn't dare ignore. You swear by your own life, your family, your livestock, and even the reed mat your grandmother sits on during holy festivals. It's the kind of oath that covers every possible angle, from the tangible to the spiritual to the absurdly specific. The crowd leans in. Some people nod. A few look bored. One child giggles and is promptly hushed by his mother. But no one questions the ritual. Oaths are serious business. They can clear your name or curse you for generations. And if the judge still isn't satisfied, there's always a way to back it up with another dip in the river. Sure enough, as you lower your hand, the judge gestures toward the door again. The priest sighs, you sigh, and someone in the crowd mutters, again, under their breath. You can't help but agree. It seems the gods require double confirmation today. The sun is higher now, beating down on the temple courtyard as you retrace your steps toward the river. This time, you're not alone. Another man, one of your witnesses, has been summoned to swear as well. He walks beside you, nervously adjusting his headscarf, muttering about barley weights and the value of goats. You both know what's coming. Oaths don't mean much unless the river agrees. By the time you reach the riverbank again, the priest is already there, sandals off, sleeves rolled. He's ready for another sacred splash. You and your witness are instructed to enter the water together this time. It's not meant to be graceful. It's meant to be honest. The belief is simple. If you're lying, the river will know. And if you're telling the truth, it will let you go. You wade in, trying not to trip over hidden rocks or sharp shells. The mud squelches between your toes. Your witness lets out a quiet curse as he stumbles knee-deep into the current. The officiant raises his hand, chants a brief invocation, and you both submerge yourselves without being told. The water closes over your heads like a door shutting behind you. It's quiet beneath the surface, murky, brownish, but still. For a moment, it feels like time stops. No judges, no laws, no steles, no goats, no debts. Just silence and water. Then your lungs start to burn. You kick up, gasp for air, and hear your witness spluttering beside you. You're both alive. You both surfaced. And now, hopefully, you're both believed. The priest helps you out with a grunt, offering you another scratchy towel and a flat stare. He doesn't smile. This isn't about comfort. It's about ceremony. You've fulfilled the ritual. Now it's up to the court to decide if your performance was convincing enough. Back at the temple, you're ushered to the center once more. Wet again, cold again, but this time something has changed. The judge nods slowly as the priest recounts what happened. The scribe notes every detail, time, witnesses, outcome, in careful cuneiform lines. You wonder if future generations will read it and laugh, or if they'll just marvel at the fact that anyone survived 2 rounds of religious swimming. Then comes the final question. Not from the judge, but from one of the elders seated at the side, a man so wrinkled he looks like he was born when the stele was still warm from carving. He raises one hand, and his voice cuts through the room like a blade wrapped in linen. Who will vouch for this man's character? Everyone goes silent. This is the part no one prepares you for. Laws are carved in stone, but your reputation floats on gossip and memory. You glance around, desperate to meet someone's eyes, someone who might say, he's honest, or at least, he never lied to me about anything important. One man coughs, another studies his fingernails. But then, from the edge of the room, a voice speaks. It's the old baker. You helped her once, weeks ago, when her oven collapsed and she needed someone to lift the stones. She steps forward, slow and deliberate, and declares that you are a fool, but not a thief. There's a ripple of laughter. Even the judge raises an eyebrow. The scribe dutifully writes it down. It may not sound flattering, but it's more than enough. The judge leans back, folds his hands, and recites the law that applies, something about unproven theft, good character, and priestly rights. It's a long passage, formal and distant, but the verdict is clear. You are free to go. No fine, no beating, no branding. Not even a public shaming. Aside from what you've already endured, you breathe again, fully, for the first time in hours. But before you're allowed to leave, you must pay the scribe's fee, because justice might be divine, but it still comes with paperwork. You hand over 3 silver shekels, more than you'd like, and receive in return a stamped tablet proving your innocence. It's small, dense, and easily lost, but it's yours. As you step out into the daylight, the temple behind you, the crowd already dispersing, you're left with a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. You survived Hammurabi's court. You didn't drown. You didn't lie. Well, not too much. And now you can go back to your life. At least until someone else decides to accuse you of something. Because in Babylon, justice is swift, sure, and always watching. And sometimes, even a tablet stamped with your freedom isn't enough to stop the blade of the law from circling back. Especially if the punishment it holds next is more than just a dunk in the river. You try not to look back as you leave the temple for the second time, but it's hard. That statue, Hammurabi receiving the law like it was a gift from the gods, is burned into your memory now. You saw it every time you blinked. And even as the clay tablet confirming your innocence grows warm in your palm, you can't shake the feeling that the laws written beneath that image don't sleep. They don't forget. And they're not always fair. You take the long way home, past market stalls and shuttered doorways, trying to blend in with the crowd. The city of Babylon stretches in all directions, crumbling mud brick homes huddled against gleaming temples, narrow alleys giving way to sunlit courtyards, where merchants haggle and children chase stray dogs. The air is thick with the smell of roasting dates, river mud, and fresh dung, but you hardly notice any of it. Not when the echo of court still rings in your ears. Your neighbor greets you, a friendly wave and a question about your verdict, but you just nod and keep walking. It's not worth talking about. The fewer people who know your name was read aloud in court, the better. Reputation is currency here, and yours has just been dented like a bruised pomegranate at the bottom of a basket. But before you reach your home, before you can even think about changing into dry clothes, someone grabs your arm. It's a boy, dirty, barefoot, out of breath. He works at the court, one of the runners who passes notes, carries verdicts, and sometimes acts as witness in smaller cases. He gasps out the news. There's been another verdict. Another case, this one more serious. You weren't summoned, but he thought you'd want to see it, because it's someone you know. You hesitate for only a moment. Then you follow. Back at the temple, the atmosphere has shifted. The room is fuller, heavier. There's no shouting, no argument, just stillness. The kind that only arrives when everyone already knows what's about to happen. At the center stands a man, shirt torn, knees shaking, face pale. He's accused of a far worse crime than yours. Not a dispute over livestock or a questionable loan. This is about betrayal. About breaking an oath sworn in the name of the gods. He's a builder, they say. Constructed a house that collapsed and killed the owner's son. That's no minor offense. And the law, written clearly, precisely, and without ambiguity, says that if a builder causes a death through poor workmanship, then his own life shall answer for it. You've heard this rule before. Everyone has. It's one of the code's most famous and most feared. It's not poetic justice. It's arithmetic. One life equals another. One mistake equals a punishment so clean it doesn't need explaining. The builder pleads. Says the materials were weak, the ground too soft, the laborers lazy. He raises his hands to the judge, then the priest, then even the silent black Stele. But none of them move. The law has already spoken, carved hundreds of years ago, and its voice doesn't waver. Two men step forward, court enforcers. They carry no scrolls, no tablets, only blades, short, curved, and ceremonial. The kind you never want to see drawn in court. The kind used not in war, but in punishment. Justice, by Hammurabi's reckoning, doesn't need war drums or public gallows. It only needs witnesses, silence, and steel. The man is escorted to a side chamber, and most of the crowd doesn't follow. But some do, out of curiosity, out of duty, or maybe just because they've seen it before and can't look away this time. You stay where you are. It's not bravery that holds you in place. It's the sudden understanding that in this city, Justice doesn't rest on truth or mercy. It rests on pricing, on rules older than your grandfather's bones, on formulas carved into rock, still obeyed like gospel. When the enforcers return, their robes are clean, their faces blank. No announcement is made. The court simply resumes, like a page being turned in a long, heavy book. Outside, the city hasn't changed. Merchants still shout. Donkeys bray. Somewhere in the distance, someone's playing a reed flute with the same three notes over and over. Life goes on, even when it ends abruptly for someone else. You walk home again, this time with the full weight of what you've seen pressing down on your shoulders. Your own trial feels small now, almost forgettable. But you remember one particular clause from the code, one that always seems strange, even cruel. If a man strikes another and causes him to lose an eye, then the striker shall lose his eye in return. Not a fine, not jail, just an eye for an eye. It's famous now. People recite it with a certain pride, like Babylon invented fairness. But standing in that courtroom, watching blood become law, you're not sure fairness has anything to do with it. There's a blacksmith who lives near you. He once told you he keeps a special set of chisels just for writing punishments on clay. Not laws, not contracts, just punishments. Says they come up more often, and clients like to keep a record. One day, he told you about a man who lost his hand for touching a noblewoman's veil. Another who had his tongue pulled out for slander. You thought he was exaggerating. Now you're not so sure. And when you pass the blacksmith's stall on your way home, you see the man himself, hammering a blade over hot coals. He looks up, meets your eyes, and says nothing. Just nods once, like he knows where you've been. Like he's seen too many people come back from the court, a little quieter than they left. You nod back. Because what else can you do? You survived the river. You survived the trial. But next time, if the accusation is worse, or the judge more skeptical, it won't be water that decides your fate. It'll be iron. But the courtroom isn't just a place for death and dismemberment. It's also a stage. And behind every performance of justice, there's someone recording the story, making sure every punishment, every pardon, every whispered confession ends up preserved in the only language the law respects, cuneiform on clay, carved wedge by wedge, line by careful line. And that brings you to the person who holds the real power in the courtroom, even if they never raise their voice. The scribe. You wouldn't notice the scribe at first. That's the trick. He's seated just behind the judge, tucked in the shadows where the torchlight doesn't reach directly, cross-legged on a mat, a small tray of clay tablets stacked beside him like loaves cooling on a maker's shelf. His reed stylus moves fast, tapping and slicing into the soft surface, one angled wedge at a time. It's quiet work, but constant. And while everyone else in the room watches the drama unfold, the scribe watches something else. The record. You've seen him before, or at least someone like him. They're everywhere. At the city gates, in the temples, at the granaries, in the tax booths. Their fingers are stained with dust, their eyes always squinting, their mouths twitching with words they don't say aloud. They're not judges, but they might as well be. Because once a scribe writes it down, it might as well be truth. In Hammurabi's Babylon, memory isn't enough. You don't trust a man's word. You trust the tablet he carries. And the court scribe is the one who decides what that tablet says. As you sit outside the temple walls now, crying in the sun and trying to forget the sound of a ceremonial blade being unsheathed, you can still picture that scribe. He never looked up, never flinched. When the builder was condemned, when the river ordeal was approved, when the priest muttered the divine names, his stylus never stopped. You imagine the tablets in his tray now. One marked for the builder, another for your trial, one for the witness testimony, another for the verdict. All baked in the sun by afternoon, hardened into history by evening. You'd like to think it's an honest record. that the law, for all its brutality, is at least preserved truthfully. But anyone who's paid a scribe knows better. You remember a friend, a brewer, who once told you about a dispute over beer rations. She swore she gave the right portion to the guards, but the tablet said otherwise. Turned out the scribe had been gifted a few mugs on the side to forget the actual numbers. She laughed when she told the story, but her tavern closed a few months later. Some mistakes cost you silver. Some cost your livelihood. And that's the danger of the fine print. You might follow the law. You might even survive the punishment. But if the tablet tells a different story, then history is not on your side. The scribe holds the pen, and the pen is mightier than... Well, you've seen what it's mightier than. In the temple archive, they say there are thousands of tablets, each marked with court cases, land sales, marriages, loans, debts, disputes. Every one of them written by a hand like his. You can walk through the halls and read about a man who insulted his father, or a merchant who tried to shortchange a priest, or a woman who accidentally pushed another into a canal. The punishments are right there, beside the names. Sometimes harsh, sometimes strange, occasionally generous, but always there, frozen in the angles of a stylus. And here's the strange part. Sometimes the laws contradict themselves. Not always, but just enough to raise an eyebrow. You'll read one clause that says if a man steals, his hand must be cut off. Then another that says if the thief is a minor, he must repay triple the value instead. And if he can't pay, well, then maybe he becomes a servant to the victim. It's like reading three versions of the same story, each written for a different audience. Historians still wonder if Hammurabi intended it that way. Maybe he knew his laws had to bend. Maybe he wanted the judge to have options. Or maybe he just needed a thick enough rule book to keep everyone guessing. After all, a law you can't fully understand is a law that keeps you nervous. And nervous people are easier to control. But the scribe doesn't care about contradictions. He just writes. Sometimes he'll pause to ask a question, what year is it? Or how many witnesses? Or was the ox branded? But that's the extent of his involvement. He isn't there to argue, or judge, or even feel. He's there to record. And if your story ends up skewed because your name sounded like someone else's, or because the ink ran on the day your tablet was stamped, well, that's just fate. You once watched a scribe drop a tablet by accident. It shattered. 4 hours of testimony gone in a blink. He didn't panic. Just asked the witness to repeat themselves. You admired the calm, even as it chilled you. Because if memory can be rewritten that easily, then how do you know what really happened in any case? You wonder what your tablet says now. Probably something short. Your name, the accusation, the river trial, the witness, the verdict, a line or two about character, maybe. A footnote on the baker's testimony. That's how most cases end up, summarized into 10 or 15 lines, fired hard in the sun, and tucked onto a shelf somewhere next to thousands of others. And one day, maybe generations from now, someone will dig it up, brush the dust off, translate the signs, try to understand what you did and why the law cared. But you're not thinking that far ahead. Right now, you're just wondering how long this tablet will protect you. How long before someone else lodges a complaint. Because as you pass by the city gates, you see another scribe bent over a tablet, listening to a merchant argue with a farmer over a crooked boundary wall. You can already hear the words forming. If a man moves his neighbor's marker, you know how that one ends. And as you walk home at last, the clay still warm in your hands, your name etched in someone else's handwriting, you begin to notice how many people carry tablets under their arms. Wrapped in cloth, tied with cord, clutched close like they might protect them from lightning. But you know better now. The tablet doesn't save you. It only reminds the court what to punish next. Because if you're lucky, your record ends with a verdict. But if you're unlucky, If you owe too much, or break the wrong rule, or insult the wrong man, then you'll face justice again. And next time, it might not leave you with fingers to hold a tablet at all. You pass a woman weeping on a bench near the temple wall. She clutches her arm close to her chest, her sleeve dark with blood. No one stops to comfort her. They just glance at her, nod, and keep walking. You don't need to ask what happened. You already know, which makes it all the more unnerving to realize that even this, the pain, the wound, the silence, was probably recorded. Somewhere inside, there's a tablet about her. A few neat lines, a name, a sentence, and a law number carved into stone, like a scar that never fades. But sometimes, justice doesn't need a tablet at all. Sometimes it leaves its mark in simpler ways. A limp, a scar, an empty purse, or a missing piece of your name that no one wants to speak aloud. Still, you keep walking. The law may watch you from every doorway, but as long as you can walk, you can try to stay ahead of it. At least until the next summons comes. And when it does, you know what to expect. Fines, if you're lucky. Blood, if you're not. And always, always a record. But even punishment isn't the worst fate in Babylon. The worst fate is being forgotten entirely. And that, you realize, is why even the poorest men pay the scribe to write their name. One last time, before justice takes its due. Yet even those names don't guarantee safety. Because in this city, the same law that punishes crime can also punish truth, depending on who's rich, who's watching, and who knows how to twist the code like a silver ring around their finger. And that's exactly what you're about to see. You don't hear the verdicts anymore, but you feel them. They ripple through the streets like hot wind off sun-baked stone. A merchant's son disappears from the stalls for a week. Someone whispers false weights. A neighbor hobbles past your home with his head wrapped, one ear clearly gone. Slander, they say. A young woman in the alley refuses to speak, her hands shaking, her veil torn at the edge. No one says a word, but everyone knows. The law reaches everyone eventually. And when it does, it leaves behind shame, silver, or silence. Shame is the easiest to spot. A branded cheek, a shaved head, a tunic turned inside out for a week is punishment. It's humiliating, sure, but also strangely survivable. People recover from shame. They get new haircuts, move neighborhoods, invent a cousin they can blame for the whole mess. Shame stains, but it doesn't ruin, at least not always. Silver, on the other hand, is cleaner but more painful. When justice demands coins instead of blood, it feels like mercy, until you can't pay. A simple fine for a broken contract might cost a month's wages. A mistake during a trade negotiation? Triple damages. A careless insult to a noble servant? 5 shekels and a public apology. For the rich, it's nothing. For everyone else, it means selling tools, bartering your harvest early, or begging the temple scribes to let you pay in installments, which they almost never do. You remember one man who sold his daughter's wedding jewelry to cover a fine after arguing with the city guard. The guard forgot the argument within a day. The daughter never forgave him. That's the thing about silver. Once it leaves your hand, it doesn't come back. And it's always accompanied by a record. But the most common outcome isn't shame or silver. It's silence. Silence comes when the punishment is light, but the memory heavy. When the law doesn't cut you, but carves a hollow place inside you instead. You've seen men who left the court walking tall, but never raised their voice again. Women who nodded, smiled, nodded again, but never made another deal. Children who stopped asking questions after watching their mother dragged into the temple courtyard. Silence is survival. It's compliance. It's a kind of justice the code doesn't even need to write down. Today, you walk through the marketplace and count how many people look away when you make eye contact. You notice how many speak with their heads down. You pass a potter who used to shout about his glazes and now barely mutters. A brewer who hasn't laughed since her brother's trial. A scribe whose hands shake just enough to smear the edge of each tablet. It's not fear of crime that keeps Babylon in line. It's the memory of what justice feels like, what it costs, how quickly it comes, and how long it lingers. And you survived it. Your name was written down, judged, and for now, left standing. But that tablet sits somewhere now, probably stacked with others just like it. Your voice captured in stylus marks, your life summarized in 2 lines. Your freedom preserved only because the gods or the judge were in a forgiving mood. You should feel lucky. You do, in a way. But you also feel watched, because Hammurabi's law doesn't die when the trial ends. It lives in the corners of daily life, in contracts signed too quickly, in borrowed tools returned too late, in whispered accusations that bloom like weeds. And when things go wrong, and they always do, you won't find comfort in fairness. You'll find it in strategy, in knowing who to talk to, who to avoid, what words to say, when to stay silent. It's no wonder that the man who wrote the laws, who etched them into stone so the whole world could see, wasn't just a king. He was something else entirely. Not just a ruler of men, but a ruler of systems. Because Hammurabi understood something few kings ever grasp, that power doesn't last in swords or chariots or war cries. It lasts in rules. And that's the story you're about to follow. The life of the man who didn't just survive Babylon, but shaped it. The morning sun climbed slowly over the plains, and for the first time in generations, Babylon stands at a quiet crossroads. Not in flames, not under siege, not panicking beneath the boots of foreign rulers, but still poised, waiting for something to begin. The air carries the scent of dust and grain husks. The city's low walls cast long shadows over dew-darkened clay, and the people move with a rhythm that feels cautious but hopeful. It is a transitional day, one of those unremarkable dates that no one realizes is history until it has already hardened into memory. And at the heart of it all, inside the palace, surrounded by brick courtyards and murmuring scribes, a man rises to meet his throne, not with fanfare or a military parade, but with a quiet kind of purpose. Hammurabi is not yet a figure carved into basalt. He is not yet the stoic ruler staring down from the stele. He is, at this moment, simply the heir of Sin Muballit, stepping into a position for which there is no perfect preparation. He wears modest robes, a thin golden circlet around his forehead, and a calm expression that conceals the churn of strategy already building behind his eyes. Babylon is his now, an emerging city-state with potential but little prestige. The great powers of Mesopotamia, the looming cities of Larsa, Ishnona, and Elam, barely register Babylon's new king as a threat. That suits Hammurabi fine. It is always easier to rearrange the game when no one realizes you're playing. The Babylon he inherits is compact, focused more on administration and irrigation than ceremony or spectacle. Its streets wind between mud-brick homes and bustling storehouses. Its ziggurat is respectable, but not yet magnificent. And its people are hardworking but wary. They have seen kings come and go. They have watched promises crumble in the hands of noblemen, too eager to raise taxes and not eager enough to repair broken canals. What they want is not grandeur. They want stability. They want protection from floods, fair grain prices, and safe roads for their ox-drawn carts. They want someone who listens before he commands. Hammurabi understands this. He has studied it. He has waited for this exact moment. He begins his reign without bloodshed or decree. Instead, he walks the streets. Not as a commoner, he is still king, after all, but not as a distant deity either. He visits the temple archives and reads the tax ledgers himself. He speaks with city elders, not just priests or landowners, but men who tend the fields and women who oversee the granaries. He listens to disputes about water rights and delayed deliveries about damaged roofs and unpaid debts. He says little during these visits, but the message is clear. The new king is watching, and more importantly, he is recording. Unlike other rulers who might begin their reign with elaborate festivals or demonstrations of force, Hammurabi focuses on infrastructure. He allocates silver not for monuments, but for dredging silt from clogged canals, reinforcing walls, and inspecting storehouses that were previously considered someone else's problem. These are not glamorous projects, but they yield results quickly. Farmers begin to see higher yields. Merchants find their journeys safer. Bricklayers and boatmen earn steady wages. And the city, once viewed as merely a resting stop between greater metropolises, begins to thrum with purpose. What few recognize is that Hammurabi is not merely improving Babylon, he is positioning it. Every restored aqueduct is a reason for a neighboring city to depend on Babylon's engineers. Every enforced trade route offers new leverage over cities that have grown lazy in their wealth. Hammurabi's rule is not about grabbing attention. It is about quietly becoming indispensable. He does not invade, not yet. He infiltrates with kindness, with contracts, with laws that make sense in a region plagued by corruption and inconsistency. And through it all, he writes, not poems or boasts, but rules detailed, specific, relentlessly clear. He drafts legal passages with the same care a scribe might use when balancing an account. These are not idle musings. They are early blueprints for what will become the code. He keeps them close at first, testing their use in minor disputes. He does not publish them immediately, preferring instead to observe how his judgments are received. If a ruling creates confusion or resentment, he revises. If a law is effective, he standardizes it. Every clause is refined through practical use, not divine assumption. As he consolidates power within Babylon, he keeps his eyes fixed outward. The region around him remains volatile. Larsa controls the southern trade routes. Elam threatens from the east. Eshnana looms in the north. Any one of these states could crush Babylon if provoked. Hammurabi knows this, and yet he does not flinch. He does not hide. Instead, he offers alliances. He sends emissaries bearing gifts, fine textiles, oil, and silver. He proposes treaties focused not on territory, but on water distribution and flood control. On the surface, it appears he is simply a wise ruler seeking cooperation. But beneath the surface, he is taking the first steps toward a new kind of conquest. Unlike the kings before him, Hammurabi does not measure power only in armies. He measures it in agreements, in loyalty earned not by fear, but by predictability. A city that signs with Babylon knows what it is getting. It knows that roads will be maintained, contracts will be enforced, and justice, while harsh, will at least be consistent. This reputation grows slowly, and at first, quietly. But over time, it becomes the most valuable asset in the region. People trust Babylon's laws, even if they fear them. It is around this time that Hammurabi begins to make changes to his administration. He promotes scribes who demonstrate clarity over ambition. He assigns judges based on merit rather than inheritance. He empowers regional governors, but binds them to the central court through written obligations and standardized fees. Every appointment comes with an expectation, and every expectation is documented. These rules are not flexible. They are not negotiable. They are carved into clay tablets and stored in temple vaults where even high priests cannot alter them without leaving a trace. The bureaucracy flourishes under his control. For the first time, you begin to hear the phrase, according to Babylon's records, used with weight. Disputes from neighboring cities are brought to Babylon for arbitration. Merchant contracts reference Babylonian clauses, even when drawn up in foreign temples. Slowly, carefully, Babylon becomes not just a city, but a standard. And Hammurabi, still outwardly modest, begins to understand the magnitude of what he is building. Of course, peace cannot last forever. Tensions with Larsa deepen, when a water-sharing agreement is violated. Elam grows restless after its trade privileges are restricted, and Ishnana, sensing Babylon's rising influence, begins to eye its borders with hungry curiosity. Hammurabi does not seek war, but he prepares for it. And when the moment comes, when diplomacy fails, when treaties collapse, he acts not with panic, but with precision. He mobilizes troops who have been training for years under strict discipline. He commands engineers to fortify bridges and roadways in advance. His generals receive instructions not just for battle, but for reconstruction. And when Babylon moves, it does so like a hand closing gently into a fist. What follows is not a campaign of chaos, but of consolidation. One by one, rival cities fall, not through fire, but through fatigue. Hammurabi offers them the same promise he gave his own people: stability, order, law. Many accept it, some resist. But even those who resist know what is coming. Because Hammurabi does not conquer blindly. He brings with him the code, not yet carved into the famous Stele, not yet sealed in the Louvre's quiet halls, but already alive, spoken aloud in courtrooms, referenced by judges, carried in the minds of his administrators. A system born not from conquest, but from structure. And so, as Babylon grows from a city into a kingdom, and from a kingdom into the heart of Mesopotamia, the image of Hammurabi changes. He is no longer just the king in his garden, watching rooftops with quiet resolve. He is now the architect of a world shaped by law, a ruler whose decisions do not die with him, but stretch forward in time, baked into clay and carved into stone. You may still see him in the marketplace, robes neat, beard oiled, expression calm. But now, when people bow, they do so not just to a man. They bow to a system. And the next time he enters the courtroom, he does not merely listen. He brings with him the full weight of the code, nearly 300 laws, covering everything from irrigation disputes to medical malpractice. The law, once fluid and whispered, is now a monument, permanent, unblinking. And as he prepares to unveil it to his people, he knows this will not just define Babylon. It will define what it means to rule. The rivers are rising again, swollen from a winter of heavy rains in the north. The Euphrates rolls past Babylon like a lazy serpent, its muddy current wide and calm on the surface, but treacherous beneath. Farmers eye the canal banks with unease, wondering if this season's floods will behave. But beyond the bends of the river, past the last shrines and boundary markers, the water is not merely a source of irrigation or transport. It is a border, and on the other side of that border, enemies are watching. Hammurabi stands in his war pavilion just before dawn, surrounded by clay maps, commanders, and the smell of cold ash from last night's fire. The room is quiet, but tense. Not out of fear, his men are disciplined, but because everyone knows that something is about to shift. Years of diplomacy, of trade agreements and mutual oaths, are beginning to fray. The cities that once called him ally now mutter about independence. The messages arriving from Larsa and Ishnana are stiff with politeness, but edged with veiled threats. Elam, ever unpredictable, has grown bold again, raiding border villages, kidnapping merchants, flexing muscle that has been idle for too long. The rivers that once carried grain and goodwill now carry scouts and soldiers. And Hammurabi is ready. He has spent years preparing for this, not through bluster or blind aggression, but through meticulous planning. Babylon's armies are not the largest in the region, but they are perhaps the best coordinated. They do not fight for spoils or vengeance. They fight under written commands with precise rules of engagement. The king has drilled them in formations rarely seen among Mesopotamian forces. Engineers march beside infantry. Quartermasters travel with scribes. Orders are recorded, not shouted. Even the war horses are branded with the city's seal and fed according to measured rations tallied by temple accountants. Because for Hammurabi, war is not chaos, it is policy. His first concern is the south. Larsa, long a rival of Babylon, controls fertile fields and crucial irrigation routes. Its king, Rimsin, has held power for decades, a seasoned ruler with no shortage of confidence. He believes Hammurabi is still the soft-spoken administrator of old, a man of courts, not campaigns. And for a time, that belief gave Hammurabi room to move in silence. Now, as Hammurabi's army approaches Larsa's northern outposts, Rim-Sin realizes the error. Babylon's forces are not scattered conscripts. They move like craftsmen, each unit drilled, each decision grounded in a written strategy. They do not sack villages. They establish order. Roads behind them are repaired, not burned. They leave behind scribes and storekeepers, not just swords. One by one, cities under Larsa's influence surrender, not because they are overrun, but because Hammurabi offers something more valuable than gold: structure. He promises that their land will be measured fairly, that disputes will be judged according to a common standard, that their canals will be protected under decree. He offers laws, not loot. And in a world where kings often act like raiders, that is a rare thing. But Hammurabi does not rely only on goodwill. He is no fool. When a city resists, he responds quickly and without apology. Sieges are short, decisive, and surgical. His engineers cut supply lines with calculated precision. Fortified walls are breached, not with brute force, but with strategy. Tunnels dug in silence. Gates unhinged with timing, defenders broken by disinformation before the first arrow is loosed. One captured city yields not only territory but maps, detailed layouts of Rim-Sin's defenses, drawn by a disaffected scribe in exchange for sanctuary. Hammurabi does not reward the betrayal with silver or praise. He simply notes the man's name, assigns him to the archives, and makes use of the information. The march continues. Southward, Babylonian banners ripple above newly annexed cities. The code travels with the army, inscribed on portable tablets and carried by appointed judges who set up mobile courts within days of occupation. Justice follows the conquests like a second army, equally feared and far more permanent. But just as one enemy weakens, another stirs. Ishnana, nestled in the northern reaches near the Tigris, grows restless at Babylon's southern campaign. Its rulers fear encirclement. They respond by closing trade routes, detaining Babylonian merchants, and accusing Hammurabi of overreach. The king responds not with threats, but with silence. He does not send messengers. He does not issue proclamations. He moves his forces north. It is not merely a show of strength. It is a reminder. For years, Hammurabi allowed Ishnuna its pride, its independence, its illusions. But illusions can be dangerous. Ishnana believes it can match Babylon's legal sophistication with its own scribes. It believes its armies, though less organized, will hold ground through force of numbers. What it does not understand is that Babylon does not fight to win. Babylon fights to absorb. When Hammurabi's troops reach the outer regions of Ishnuna's territory, they do not destroy the local shrines or take the residents as captives. They open negotiations with local elders. They distribute tablets outlining tax relief for cooperative cities. They offer infrastructure, canals, granaries, patrols. And most important of all, they offer consistency. It is not long before border towns switch allegiance without a sword drawn. Governors who once sneered at Babylon's courtroom king now recite lines from the code in their rulings. Even in cities where resistance flares, it burns out quickly. Hammurabi is patient. He knows how to wait for internal divisions to surface. And when they do, he moves swiftly, striking at fault lines already softened by doubt. Then there is Elam. To the east, across the Zagros, Elam has always been different, less predictable, more alien to Babylonian customs. Its rulers are ambitious, its people proud, and its history full of invasions that ended poorly for both sides. Hammurabi does not want a war with Elam, but neither does he intend to let its raids go unanswered. He sends emissaries, offers border adjustments, even hints at shared trade routes through intermediary cities. Elam listens, but only barely. It sees Babylon's rise and begins reinforcing its garrisons. Skirmishes increase. Caravans vanish. Messengers go missing. This time, Hammurabi does not delay. He sends not just troops, but scribes, men trained to document enemy positions, to catalog terrain, to translate intercepted messages. Babylonian scouts infiltrate under the guise of merchants. Small temples are approached with bribes to gather rumors. Elam's weaknesses are not in its walls. They are in its bureaucracy. Hammurabi seeks not to shatter Elam, but to destabilize it, make it question itself, make it trip over its own pride. The plan is long, subtle, and it will continue over years, not weeks. But that's the thing about enemies on the riverbanks. They expect storms. They don't expect erosion. Hammurabi's strategy is not to flood them with might, but to wear down the resistance drop by drop. And behind every campaign, every map, every forward supply station, the code follows. It is there when a new city is captured, dictating how prisoners are to be treated, how property is to be inventoried, how justice is to be reestablished. Hammurabi does not see law and warfare as opposites. He sees them as extensions of the same philosophy, the imposition of order on chaos. From the Euphrates to the Tigris, from the marshes of the south to the trade roads of the north, Babylon's influence now moves like a tide, not through terror, but through reliability. And with each step, Hammurabi expands not just a kingdom, but a framework, one that promises that power is not in unpredictability, but in knowing exactly what will happen next. And what happens next is not a siege or a surrender, but a declaration, one that will carve his laws into stone and set them before the eyes of the gods. Because it is time to begin writing the code for everyone to see. It begins not with a sword, but with a stylus. As the campaign expands and Babylon's banners rise over new cities, Hammurabi turns inward, not for reflection, but for refinement. His armies advance, yes, but only as far as his systems can support them. Steel can take a city, but what holds it is strategy. And strategy, to Hammurabi, means infrastructure, logistics, and law. He does not believe in conquering for conquest's sake. He believes in permanence. And permanence, he knows, is built from stone. In the weeks following the absorption of Larsa, Babylon's camps become construction sites. Roads are widened, not for parades, but for carts carrying rations and grain tribute. Storehouses are standardized, brick dimensions, door locks, even the spacing of clay jars are uniform across every annexed region. Scribes are stationed at each outpost, tasked with measuring yields, recording troop inventories, and most importantly, collecting testimonies from local leaders. Nothing is left to chance. Every command is documented. Every district has a map. Every canal bend is cataloged for both irrigation and possible tactical retreat. Soldiers receive their orders from officers who carry wax tablets, etched with phrases as dry and precise as any court ruling. Patrol routes are rotated not based on instinct, but on rotations plotted out weeks in advance. Discipline is harsh, but rarely questioned. A soldier who disobeys a supply order might not lose a hand, but he'll lose his rations for a month, and worse, be assigned latrine maintenance, an ancient punishment as timeless as empire building itself. And still, Hammurabi writes, he writes during the briefest lulls between campaigns, scribbling on wax tablets by torchlight as officers rest and scouts return with news. The laws grow steadily, organized not by poetry or prestige, but by practicality. Building codes, medical fees, marriage contracts, rules for grain hoarding, measures for fraudulent priests. Every scenario is reduced to a pattern. If this, then that. Penalty follows crime, like shadow follows flame. Stone carvers begin the process of preparing draft panels. Temporary stele are set up in captured cities, not the famous basalt monolith that will eventually stand in the temple, but rough-hewn prototypes, simple and clear. These traveling steles are carried by carts, guarded like treasure. Wherever they appear, a message is obvious. Babylon does not simply take, it transforms. One such stele arrives in the city of Ezen, recently wrested from Lars's influence. The people gather to read the laws, or at least to hear them recited by court priests. They listen to phrases that have become familiar throughout the region. If a builder constructs a house and it collapses, if a man strikes his neighbor during a quarrel, if a merchant cheats with false weights, the people murmur in agreement or fear, depending on their profession. For the first time in living memory, they know what to expect. But the sword remains necessary. While the code brings structure, it does not erase resistance. In Eshnunna, several governors attempt to reassert independence under the banner of tradition. They claim Babylon's laws are foreign, cold, bureaucratic. Their protests quickly gain support among nobles who benefited from looser rules and local judges easy to bribe. Within a fortnight, minor revolts flare. Hammurabi does not hesitate. His response is not flamboyant, it is mathematical. Units are deployed based on predicted choke points and known grain stores. Bridges are blocked, not destroyed. City gates are jammed with wagons filled with stones. Left where the rebels might panic and think the city is collapsing. When the actual attack begins, it lasts less than a day. But after the dust settles, Hammurabi does not execute the leaders immediately. He has something more potent in mind. He summons the surviving rebels and has them stand before a local court, not a military tribunal, an ordinary civil court under the new laws. Their crimes are read aloud, their property is inventoried. Witnesses are called, scribes record every word. The punishment is announced: exile, loss of property, reassignment of estates to temple stewardship. Public, lawful, impeccably organized. The message is clear. This is not Hammurabi's vengeance. This is the code in action. You rebel not against a man, but against a system. And the system, like stone, does not bend. It simply remains. Steel still gleams in his arsenals, of course. New forges are built on the outskirts of Babylon. Blacksmiths are issued quotas. The quality of weapons is measured with the same scrutiny given to grain. Swords are tested on reed bundles. Axes are stamped with seals. But even as his arsenal expands, Hammurabi continues to see the battlefield not as a place of glory, but of necessity. His real battlefield is the mind. He sends gifts to rival cities that have not yet bowed: fine robes, exotic herbs, rare incense. Each gift is accompanied by a tablet, not a threat, a list. It includes the new legal clauses Babylon uses, the fines, the protections, the rules for inheritance. It is, in its way, a seductive offer. Submit, and this system can be yours. Fight and face chaos. Most rulers scoff, but their scribes do not. Quietly, they begin to copy the tablets. They incorporate Babylonian weights into their markets. They reference Babylonian procedures when arguing land cases. The walls may not yet bear Hammurabi's crest, but the people within are already submitting to his logic. Strategy. In one village near the Tigris, Hammurabi's army arrives to find that the town elders have already begun organizing their affairs according to the code. The local judge produces tablets, nearly identical to the ones distributed in Babylon's heartland. Asked why, he shrugs and says, "We heard it works. Word travels. So do laws. So do expectations." By the time Babylonian troops cross into territories formerly allied with Elam, there is little need for a formal siege. These outposts are already primed, economically, legally, even spiritually, to accept what Hammurabi offers. Some temples have already begun invoking Babylonian legal formulas in their prayers. But Hammurabi does not mistake this quiet victory for lasting peace. He knows systems decay when left untended, so he builds oversight into his expansion. Traveling magistrates are appointed. Periodic audits of regional judges are implemented. Every city that joins the growing empire is required to submit annual reports, not just of taxes, but of judicial decisions. If punishments are too lenient or too harsh, they are flagged. If a city's crime rate deviates from projection, it is investigated. Every citizen is known not by personal fame, but by placement in a functioning network. And all of this is carved into stone. The final design for the Black Stele is prepared with care. Hammurabi himself oversees the wording of each clause. The top of the monument is sculpted with a familiar image: the king standing before Shamash, the sun god, receiving the laws. It is not meant to depict divine inspiration. It is meant to show legitimacy. Order, after all, must look holy. The laws beneath are arranged in measured lines, over 280 of them, each etched deeply, so no time or weather can erase them. Topics range from the predictable to the obscure: inheritance, interest rates, divorce, dowries, damaged walls, runaway servant, dock accidents, drunken midwives, stolen sheep. Nothing is beneath the law's concern. Nothing is exempt. A stele is not placed in the palace. It is installed in the temple courtyard, where commoners can walk past it, where judges can point to it, where plaintiffs and defendants alike can squint at the rules and know that, for better or worse, the law does not change based on who is watching. And yet Hammurabi knows what others may not say aloud. That law is never truly neutral. The code is fair, on paper, but it is also an instrument. And like a sword, it can be used with care or cruelty. The stone is honest, but the hands that wield it are still human, which is why he trains those hands carefully. His scribes are selected not for loyalty, but for memory. His judges are rotated, not to confuse them, but to prevent corruption. His governors are audited. His own court is watched by watchers, each answering to a higher layer. Babylon's structure is not flat. It is recursive, like a spiral staircase carved into a mountain. Stone holds the law. Steel enforces it. Strategy sustains it. And as the campaigns slow and the code spreads, Hammurabi stands not just as a king, but as a force, an idea made manifest. His enemies no longer measure his strength in soldiers. They measure it in tablets, and they wonder not whether they can defeat him, but whether it is already too late to resist. The conquest continues, but it is no longer about cities. It is about systems. And when a city joins Hammurabi now, it does not fall. It adapts. The chisels strike the stone with rhythmic precision, each tap deliberate, each stroke final. You watch from the shade of a wooden scaffold, the smell of freshly cut basalt mingling with sweat and dust. The artisans are quiet as they work, not because they're reverent, but because the work demands perfection. One slip, one angle off, and the entire line must be smoothed over and started again. Stone does not forgive. Neither does the law being carved into it. You've seen many tablets in your life. They fill the archives of the temples, clutter the shelves of merchants, even hang from the belts of scribes like sacred charms. But this is something different. This is no contract or verdict or grain account. This is something meant to outlive all of you. The slab stands taller than a man and twice as broad, its top rounded like the edge of a thumb. It doesn't feel like a legal record. It feels like a monument. The image at the top has already been carved. The king standing, hand to mouth in respect, before Shamash, the sun god. The god sits on a throne of flames, rays shooting from his shoulders, a measuring rod and rope in his hands, the tools of cosmic judgment. It's clear what the image means. Hammurabi receives his authority not from bloodlines, not from armies, but from divine order itself. And below that image, the laws begin. They do not start with war or land. They start with people, with structure, with statements so precise they feel mechanical. If a man accuses another man and charges him with murder, but cannot prove it, the accuser shall be put to death. No poetry, no room for ambiguity. It is justice by formula, ethics by equation. Hammurabi does not dictate the code all at once. It has grown over years, shaped by court cases, temple debates, observations, and trial. He has judged disputes himself, not just in Babylon, but in newly annexed cities, adjusting the language until the penalties fit the pattern. The clauses cover theft, debt, marriage, divorce, inheritance, assault, agriculture, commerce, and dozens of situations so specific they seem almost invented. One section details what happens if a man rents an ox that dies of natural causes. Another explains what to do if a house collapses during construction and kills the owner's son. These aren't theoretical. They are case law, etched for eternity. You notice something strange the longer you read. The laws are not equal. Nobles receive different punishments than commoners. A broken bone inflicted on a rich man demands a higher price than the same injury to a servant. There is order, yes, but not fairness. It's not modern justice. It's Babylonian balance, rooted in status and cost. But for the first time in this land's history, that imbalance is transparent. You know the rules, even if they don't favor you. And in a world of whispered bribes and shifting decrees, predictability is its own kind of safety. Still, you wonder how these laws will feel in practice. There's one about a doctor who performs surgery with a bronze knife. If the patient dies or loses an eye, the doctor's hands are to be cut off. The idea is simple. If your profession can harm, you should share the risk. But what happens when no one wants to become a doctor anymore? What happens when fear paralyzes service? It's the kind of question people whisper when they think the court scribes aren't listening. But Hammurabi does listen, not always with words, but with outcomes. When certain laws prove too harsh, he amends their application. He doesn't erase them. They remain carved, but he adjusts the way they're used. He refines the court process, ensures witnesses are cross-examined, that contracts are properly stamped. The system learns, even if the stone stays rigid. The stele itself becomes part of the system. Copies are made, not exact replicas, but clay versions inscribed and distributed to temple courts across the kingdom. Each judge receives one. Each city installs one. Smaller towns display abridged editions, simplified for local disputes. But the message is consistent. Babylon has rules, and those rules come not from whims, but from Hammurabi's hand. His seal appears on every major clause, a small symbol at the end marking the passage as legitimate. Counterfeiting such seals is considered a crime equivalent to sacrilege. And yes, there's a law for that too. Scribes are trained not just to read the code, but to apply it. They memorize key clauses, use wax tablets for reference, debate interpretations late into the night in quiet temple chambers. Some say this is when true legal scholarship begins, not just in Babylon, but anywhere. Because here, law becomes an academic pursuit, something you can teach, debate, challenge, even quote. And while the punishments remain harsh, the structure they emerge from begins to feel oddly modern. Yet even in this clarity, there are quirks. Some laws appear twice with different wording. Others include conditions that contradict later clauses. And some are simply strange. There's a law about catching someone's wife drinking in the tavern. Another about oxen that gore people under specific circumstances. Scholars argue over why these entries were included. Were they common cases? Cautionary tales? Or simply too amusing for the king to omit? Historians still debate it. Even in Hammurabi's time, temple officials wonder aloud why some crimes are punished with silver and others with limbs. Why some contracts can be annulled after a single witness, while others require a board of elders. But the king never explains. He does not annotate the laws. He does not offer commentary. He simply presents them stone cold, unmoving, divine. And that is the point. Because the code is not just a legal document. It's a performance, a declaration, a message to subjects and rivals alike that Babylon is no longer just a city. It is the source of order. A place where power is not simply enforced, it is justified, enumerated, etched. In a time when kings ruled by fear or fire, Hammurabi rules by design. And design, as it turns out, is harder to defeat. You return to the Stele weeks later and find someone else reading. A merchant, holding a wax tablet and shaking his head at one of the pricing clauses. Too generous to the buyer, he mutters. Then, seeing you, he chuckles and adds, still better than Eshnona's nonsense. That, more than anything, reveals the success of Hammurabi's project. People argue about the code. They reference it. They compare it. Even when they disagree with it, they know it. It becomes the backbone of public life, not because it is perfect, but because it is public. Open, present, immovable. Still, one cannot help but notice what is missing from the laws. There is no clause for rebellion, no forgiveness for treason. The punishments are severe, yes, but the code assumes loyalty. It offers no mercy for those who would challenge its authority directly. And maybe that's why Hammurabi is already preparing something else, an expansion of the legal network into a broader system of surveillance, reports, and centralized control. Because once you publish the rules, you must enforce them. And enforcement requires more than stone. It requires people. Which is why the next chapter in Hammurabi's rule is not about writing at all. It is about showing the code in action, using it to tame the nobles, frighten the courts, and cement Babylon's dominance through ritualized justice. The code has begun. Now it will be weaponized. You see it first in the way people speak. Not the scribes or judges. They've always used the language of law. No, it's the merchants now, bargaining with phrases like, according to clause 94, or the Stele says 6 shekels, not 7. It's the priests, quoting laws and sermons as though they were scripture. It's mothers scolding their sons by reminding them that Hammurabi says thieves lose fingers. The code has moved beyond courtrooms. It has become conversation. Hammurabi intended this. He doesn't rule by divine whispers alone. He doesn't need armies in every alley or spies in every tavern. Instead, he lets the stone speak. The Stele stands in public view, not hidden in a palace or buried in temple vaults. It towers in the main courtyard of Babylon's largest temple, visible to farmers, traders, bakers, and even beggars. Its presence is symbolic, yes, but it's also strategic. It reminds everyone, every day, that there is a system now, a framework, and that they are being watched not by a man, but by an idea. The image at the top, Shamash handing down the rod and ring of authority, becomes the most recognizable emblem in the kingdom. Children draw it in the dirt. Artisans carve it into bricks. It appears on seals, on walls, even stamped onto pots. Justice isn't just enforced anymore, it's advertised. You hear it in songs, chanted by traveling musicians in taverns, woven into the verses of epic tales. They don't sing the law itself. Of course, that would be too dry, but they sing its victories. A dishonest trader punished by decree, a judge exposed for favoritism, a widow who wins her land dispute because the code is on her side. True stories or invented, it doesn't matter. What matters is the feeling they leave behind, that the system works, that it protects the good and punishes the wicked. It doesn't always, of course, but it looks like it does. And that's what makes it powerful. The nobles feel it too. They're not immune to the law, but they do know how to bend it. They hire scribes to interpret the code in clever ways. They sponsor judges. They commission copies of the Stele for their own estates, sometimes with helpful lines emphasized in darker ink. And yet, they still cite the laws with pride. Even when they manipulate them, they wrap themselves in the illusion of justice. Hammurabi's genius isn't in removing corruption. It's in making the system so strong that even corruption has to pretend to play by its rules. You attend a trial in Sippar, a city absorbed by Babylon a few seasons ago. The courtroom is packed. A land dispute has escalated, two noble families arguing over the boundary between their estates. Both arrive with armies of scribes, piles of tablets, witnesses, even temple documents dating back a generation. You expect chaos. Instead, the judge arrives in silence, flanked by priests and a copy of the code set on a stone pedestal beside him. He begins not by asking for arguments, but by reading a passage aloud. The room quiets. Even the nobles lower their eyes. This is performance. Ritual. Propaganda in its cleanest form. The trial lasts days. The ruling is complicated. No one leaves fully satisfied. But no one riots. No one challenges the decision. They accept it because the code was quoted. The stone was present. The script was followed. It becomes clear. Hammurabi doesn't need to be everywhere. The laws are his stand-ins. The judges are his proxies. The Stele is his voice. In a kingdom this vast, with roads stretching days across barren scrub and walled cities isolated by rivers, that voice needs to travel far. And now it does. You notice that even rebellion is framed through the lens of the code. When a governor in the eastern districts begins hoarding taxes, he isn't accused of treason. He's accused of violating Clause 124. When a military commander refuses to return borrowed oxen after a campaign, the dispute isn't settled with swords. It's brought before a tribunal quoting livestock law. There's power in this kind of framing. It transforms threats into technical violations. It strips enemies of their righteousness and reduces their defiance to paperwork. No one wants to follow a rebel who's described as a tax delinquent. The code robs dissidents of poetry. And in politics, poetry is everything. You pass by a school for young scribes one afternoon and see them reciting clauses from memory. The room smells of damp clay and oil lamps. The students chant the laws in sing-song rhythms, eyes half-lidded with boredom, but their hands move quickly, copying each clause into soft tablets. This is the next generation of power, not kings or warriors, but writers. They are the future handlers of the law, and they will know its language better than their fathers knew the sword. Hammurabi's inner circle knows what he's doing. They watch as he unveils new copies of the code in distant temples, always with public ceremony. They know the spectacle matters. One advisor even jokes that the Stele is a monument to obedience. But no one laughs too hard, because they've seen how well it works. Even distant cities, once skeptical, begin to request versions of the code. They ask for clarifications, rulings, commentaries. They send scribes to Babylon to study its application. One foreign envoy, upon leaving court, remarks, "It is like your king carved his voice into stone and made it louder than any trumpet." He meant it as flattery. It's repeated as prophecy. You begin to realize that Hammurabi has not just written laws. He has written a myth, a living one that tells every farmer and potter and merchant that the world is made of rules now. That order is real. That fairness exists, even if just barely, even if mostly on paper. And the most brilliant part? It doesn't matter if it's always true. It only matters that people believe it. You see it in small things. A child hesitating before stealing a fig. A tenant quoting Clause 45 when arguing with a landlord. A builder pausing to check the load-bearing stones twice, not out of fear of collapse, but fear of consequence. The laws have reshaped behavior. They've woven themselves into daily life like threads in a reed basket. Not always seen, but always holding the shape. And Hammurabi? He doesn't need to lift a finger. His name is already on everyone's lips. His face is on every stele. His rules shape every judgment. But he knows that symbols, like laws, can lose their edge. A system that governs through belief must be maintained through example. And so he prepares one final gesture, not a battle, not a law, but a performance. One that will show even the nobles that the code is not a suggestion. One that will remind the kingdom who made the rules, and who will enforce them when it matters most. A palace is no longer a place of constant motion. The murmurs of advisors, the clatter of scribes, the footfalls of envoys, those sounds still exist, but they echo less urgently now. Babylon continues to function, even thrive, but within the palace walls, a kind of stillness is settled. Hammurabi, once the energetic force behind every decree and campaign, now moves with slower steps and longer pauses. His face bears the creases of time, not just from age, but from the weight of leadership. Years of balancing law, warfare, diplomacy, and construction, all woven into one sprawling system. He no longer walks the streets in disguise to observe the courts or question the markets, but he still rules, even if from a seat that he rarely rises from. Though the kingdom he built remains stable, Hammurabi's role has changed. He no longer debates the precise phrasing of legal clauses late into the night. Instead, he reviews decisions made by others, magistrates, governors, judges, seeking not to correct them, but to confirm whether the machine he constructed continues to operate as intended. He listens to reports quietly, nods with slow deliberation, and speaks only when necessary. His presence no longer commands fear or even awe. It inspires reflection. Those who meet with him find themselves quoting the law before he asks, anticipating his questions, hoping that their interpretations align with his original vision. He does not demand this behavior. It simply happens. In his private chamber, surrounded by clay tablets stacked neatly in cedar boxes, Hammurabi spends hours in the archives. He no longer reads every line, but he traces the surfaces of the tablets as though reacquainting himself with old friends. Some were etched decades ago, during the earliest days of his reign when his handwriting was still sharp and impatient. Others are newer, carved by the hands of scribes trained in his methods, their strokes slower, more deliberate. He examines the earliest versions of laws that have since become pillars of Babylonian society, regulations on trade, rulings on property disputes, judgments concerning family inheritance. Each one represents a choice he made, a balance struck, a precedent set in clay. What strikes him now is not the content of these laws, but the clarity with which they have endured. The language may lack grace, but its meaning remains unmistakable. Justice, as he imagined it, was never intended to be poetic or philosophical. It was meant to be useful. He watches from afar as his judges and scribes cite those laws not as abstract doctrine, but as tools that settle arguments, resolve confusion, and remind citizens where the boundaries lie. And in that purpose, the code has succeeded. The stele stands as it always has, black and unyielding, exposed to wind and sun in the temple courtyard. On most days, citizens walk past it without slowing, accustomed to its presence. But there are moments, quiet, telling moments, when someone does stop. A merchant places his hand on the stone before negotiating a sale. A young boy traces the edge of a wedge-shaped mark while waiting for his mother to finish praying. A scribe, still early in his training, kneels before it to study its lines in silence. These are not grand gestures, but they carry meaning. The laws have transcended their author. They have become embedded in the city's identity, woven into its rhythm like the patterns in its clay bricks. Hammurabi understands this. He no longer needs to speak often because the code speaks for him. Yet he remains vigilant. In his final years, he receives daily reports on how the laws are being applied, not just whether verdicts are rendered, but how consistently, how fairly, and with what effect. He monitors not the strength of his armies, but the strength of his courts. And when he finds deviations, when a local governor becomes too lenient, or a judge begins accepting bribes, he acts. Quietly, without spectacle, the official is removed, replaced by someone who understands that the law is more than stone. It is trust, and trust must be reinforced through action. He continues to mentor those who seek his counsel, particularly younger magistrates. They come bearing questions about inheritance cases, boundary disputes, and contract violations. He does not give them direct answers. Instead, he asks them what the code says and how they understand it. If their reasoning is sound, he says nothing more. If it falters, he raises an eyebrow and waits for them to correct themselves. In this way, he guides without commanding, preserving the integrity of the law while encouraging ownership among those who will carry it forward. In his final seasons, Hammurabi withdraws from ceremonial duties altogether. He no longer attends festivals, avoids banquets, and spends little time in the public eye. Yet his absence does not create unrest. The government continues. The courts operate. The roads remain safe. The code has become self-sustaining, like an irrigation system that no longer needs constant maintenance. What he has created is not a temporary order, but a durable framework. And though he knows it is not perfect, he also knows it is unprecedented. When his time comes, there is no announcement, no grand procession. Word spreads gently, first through the palace, then into the temple courts, and finally out through the city gates. Hammurabi has died, but the silence that follows is not one of panic. It is one of contemplation. There are no riots, no power struggles, no crisis of leadership. Babylon does not stumble. It adjusts as it always has, according to procedure. The transition is orderly because he made it so. His sons, trained in both administration and humility, take their places not just as rulers, but as custodians of a system greater than themselves. The court scribes continue to record verdicts. The judges continue to apply the code. The temple priests continue to offer blessings at the foot of the stele. Life continues under the weight and comfort of rules that remain unchanged. For a time, it seems the code will last forever. But the world beyond Babylon continues to shift. Rival kingdoms grow bold once more. Armies assemble not to test Hammurabi, but to test the foundation he left behind. Years pass, decades blur, and one day, when Babylon's defenses are stretched thin and its leaders distracted by internal rivalry, the enemy arrives. They do not come for justice, they come for loot. Among the spoils they carry away is a tall black monument, heavy, marked with strange writing, and adorned with a figure seated beside a king. To them, it is merely a symbol of conquest, something to place in their temple as a trophy. They do not know its meaning. They do not care. The code disappears from Babylon, not in flames or protest, but in silence. It will remain hidden for centuries, buried beneath ruins, forgotten by the people who once lived by its words. But the stone endures. It waits beneath layers of dust and time, holding within it a vision of justice, carved in an age when writing was new and law was an idea only one man dared to solidify. And one day, long after Babylon has become legend, that vision will be uncovered again, lifted from the soil by curious hands, puzzled over by foreign scholars, and studied not just as a relic, but as a message. A message from a time when justice first found its shape in stone. It happens without warning, and it happens quickly. Babylon, once the heartbeat of Hammurabi's legal order, falls not through internal collapse or divine wrath, but at the hands of men who do not care about justice. When the Elamite army breaches the gates, there is no attempt at diplomacy, no ceremony, no demand for surrender. The city's walls, which once signified security, now echo with footsteps that do not belong to its citizens. The priests withdraw into the inner chambers of the temples, unsure whether to pray or flee. The scribes abandon their benches, scattering like dry leaves across the courtyards. And the Stele, which has stood motionless in the temple for decades, does not move or speak. It merely watches as everything around it is undone. The men who pour into the sacred precincts of the city are not legal scholars. They do not quote Hammurabi's code. They carry blades, not styluses. They speak in a tongue foreign to Babylon's streets, and their purpose is simple: take whatever is valuable. They pry gold ornaments from door frames and melt down sacred vessels. They pull tablets from archives and discard them once they see they are not marked with silver. And in the heart of the temple complex, they find something they cannot read, but instinctively recognize as important. A great slab of polished black stone, inscribed with thousands of strange symbols, rises taller than any man and features the image of a king in conversation with a god. They do not need to understand it to know it is valuable. The weight of the stone alone suggests its worth. The soldiers, grunting with the effort, lift it onto a cart and secure it with ropes. There is no ceremony in its removal, only sweat and curses as it is jostled and scraped on the uneven roads out of the city. Some of them complain that it slows the convoy. Others argue that its craftsmanship alone will impress their king. None of them seem concerned with what it actually is. For them, the Stele is not a legal monument or a foundation of justice. It is a trophy, a conquest, a symbol of a defeated people. The journey east to Susa is long and difficult. The road crosses arid plains, dry riverbeds, and stony hills that wear down wheels and hooves alike. At night, the cart creaks under the stars while fires burn low and the wind shifts sand across the canvas-wrapped monument. The men protecting it treat it as both burden and prize. Some scratch their names into its base. Others spit on it. A few leave it offerings out of vague superstition. Whatever reverence the Babylonians once had for it has long since disappeared. By the time the Stele reaches Elam, its surface has changed. The top is still intact, and the carved image of Hammurabi receiving the rod and ring of authority from Shamash remains legible. But cracks have appeared along the edges, and sections of the cuneiform have been scuffed or chipped. Its transport has stripped away its dignity. It arrives not in triumph, but in anonymity, carried through Susa's gates as part of a larger wave of spoils: temple statues, ivory combs, ceremonial weapons, and livestock. The priests of Susa do not know what to do with it. The writing is foreign. The imagery is unfamiliar. It is too heavy to discard, too finely crafted to break, and too strange to use in ritual. Eventually, it is placed in a corner of a temple courtyard, behind a stack of carved pillars, and beside the base of an unfinished altar. There is no plaque to explain it. No prayers are offered beside it. The Stele stands in silence, stripped of function, awaiting either use or oblivion. Over the generations, Susa thrives and fades in cycles. Kings change. Dynasties rise and fall. The temple that houses the Stele is renovated, then neglected, then repurposed. Earthquakes shake the region. Roofs collapse. Walls are rebuilt with salvaged stone. At some point, the Stele is used as construction material, laid into the foundation of a new structure with only one side exposed. No one seems to mind that the carved text faces inward, obscured from view. It becomes part of the architecture. It becomes background. The world forgets, not immediately. The scribes of Susa remember for a while. Some of them copy portions of the text out of curiosity, noting the unfamiliar phrasing. A few attempt translations, guessing at words and getting much of it wrong. But gradually, the language shifts. Akkadian falls out of use. Cuneiform scripts evolve and then disappear. What remains of Hammurabi's laws are fragmentary references in other tablets, mentions in royal annals, echoes in foreign codes that never cite their source. For over 2,000 years, the Stele remains buried in plain sight. Empires come and go. Greek generals march through the city. Persian rulers worship their own gods in the same temples. Arab traders pass through centuries later, oblivious to the stone beneath their feet. Even as interest in ancient ruins grows in the modern era, the stele remains unrecognized. It lies beneath rubble and walls, its voice sealed in stone, waiting for the right eyes to uncover it. That moment arrives in the early 20th century, when a team of French archaeologists begins a methodical excavation of Susa's ruins. They are not searching for Hammurabi's code. In fact, they do not even know what it is. They are mapping out the foundations of the old Elamite complex, cataloging artifacts and studying architectural fragments. And then one morning, they find the stele still upright, partially embedded in a collapsed wall, its curved top protruding from a mound of earth. It takes time to free it. The soil is packed tightly around it, and the surface has become brittle from centuries of pressure. As the archaeologists clear away the debris, they begin to see the carvings. First the divine image at the top, then the endless rows of cuneiform text beneath. The discovery excites the team, but they have no idea what they're looking at. They know it is old. They know it is Babylonian. But the scope of its significance has not yet come into focus. Once the stele is cleaned and moved to a secure location, the scholars begin to decipher the script. The process is painstaking. Cuneiform is a difficult language, and the stele contains nearly 3,000 lines. But slowly, the contents emerge. Legal clauses, formulaic punishments, provisions for inheritance, debts, marriage, and crime. It is not myth or poetry. It is law. And not just any law, but a complete code, ordered, numbered, and attributed to a name few had spoken aloud in centuries: Hammurabi. When the realization takes hold, the excitement in the academic world spreads rapidly. Transcriptions are published. Scholars argue over translations. Historians reevaluate ancient legal systems. The stele, once silent and forgotten, becomes central to the study of civilization itself. It is placed in the Louvre Museum, where visitors walk past it every day, many unaware of the journey it took to reach them. For the first time since its removal, the Code of Hammurabi is seen again for what it is, not just a legal record, but a glimpse into how early empires tried to order the chaos of human behavior. The laws seem harsh to modern readers, but they are coherent, structured, and deeply concerned with fairness. At least fairness as the Babylonians understood it. What astonishes scholars most is how detailed it is. It considers theft, fraud, divorce, inheritance, prices, wages, and contracts. It outlines punishments for lying witnesses and negligent builders. It is not a dream of justice. It is its architecture. And yet, even in its rediscovery, questions linger. Why did the Elamites preserve it instead of destroying it? Why was it buried face in, hidden but protected? Why did no one ever repurpose the stone for another use, despite its size and value? Historians still debate these mysteries. Some believe it was forgotten. Others suspect it was hidden deliberately, preserved out of a strange reverence by people who didn't fully understand it. Perhaps they sensed its power and feared what would happen if they defaced it. Whatever the truth, the stele survives. The laws endure, and the voice of Hammurabi, quiet for millennia, is once again heard. But the journey of rediscovery is only half of the story. What matters next is how the world receives it, how it interprets it, challenges it, rewrites its meaning in the light of modern values and ancient curiosity. To understand the code's true afterlife, you must step into the rooms where scholars debate its clauses, into museums where visitors stare at its surface without knowing the language, into lecture halls where law professors still cite it as the beginning of something enduring. And so, the mystery continues, not of how it was written, but how it survived, and why it continues to matter. You wouldn't notice it at first. There, in the corner of a forgotten temple in Susa, the black stele leans against a wall with the weary permanence of something that has outlived its purpose. No pedestal supports it. No inscriptions mark it out for worship. It doesn't catch the eye the way golden statues or richly painted frescoes might. And yet it remains stubbornly intact in a city where nearly everything else is faded or crumbled. The stone, once central to the legal life of an empire, now rests in silence, stripped of its voice, wrapped in dust. No one in Susa reads the text anymore. The language carved into its surface, Akkadian, written in dense cuneiform, has long since fallen out of use. The symbols, once familiar to scribes across Mesopotamia, now resemble nothing more than ancient scratches to the priests who pass by it each day. They may glance at the figure carved near the top, the image of a man standing in reverence before a seated god, but they do not ask who the man was, nor do they understand what he was given. The image no longer conveys divine legitimacy. It is simply decoration, worn by time and obscured by soot and smoke. The stele survives, perhaps because it is too heavy to remove, or perhaps because it has become part of the temple's architecture. It's difficult to tell where reverence ends and indifference begins. Sometimes, temple workers prop tools against it. Children chase one another around it during ceremonies. On festival days, flower garlands are hung nearby, but never directly on the stone. It is treated as furniture rather than artifact. It has presence, but no audience. Still, it is not abandoned. Not entirely. From time to time, a curious novice may ask about it. An elder will shrug and suggest that it came from Babylon, or at least from some older place far to the west. They might call it a stone of judgment, or simply the old slab. Some claim it holds curses, though no one seems to know which ones. Others say it once recorded the names of kings, but no one knows for sure, and few care enough to ask again. The stele becomes a prop in forgotten stories, a background object in rituals that have changed too many times to remember their origins. What no one realizes is that the code it holds is still entirely legible. The wedge-shaped marks, carved with such care, have endured fire, rain, and centuries of human neglect. While paper disintegrates and tablets crack, the basalt surface has held its text in stubborn preservation. Each clause remains intact, layered from top to bottom, thousands of lines deep. If someone could still read Akkadian, they would find no missing pieces, no corrupted passages. The builder's penalties, the trader's debts, the midwife's liabilities, they are all there, waiting. But no one reads them. The silence around the stele is not just linguistic. It is intellectual. The society around it has moved on. New rulers have come, each bringing their own gods, their own rituals, their own forms of justice. The stele belongs to a vanished world, and that world no longer commands attention in Susa's courts or palaces. Judges issue rulings based on newer customs. Temple scribes copy hymns in other languages. The laws of Hammurabi, once recited aloud by priests and memorized by apprentices, now sit buried in stone, their authority evaporated. Even as the centuries pass, the stone remains unchallenged. No army sees fit to destroy it. No new king chisels over the text with his own proclamations. This might seem like indifference, but perhaps it is something more complicated. Perhaps it is the weight of ambiguity. The stele is too grand to ignore, too unreadable to use, and too old to destroy. It occupies a liminal space between memory and myth, a monument without context, a warning without an audience. In time, Susa itself begins to suffer the slow decay common to once great cities. Trade routes shift. Political alliances falter. The temples lose their funding, then their priests. The grand processions grow smaller. Entire neighborhoods fall into disuse. Wind and sand begin to reclaim the city one stone at a time. Columns topple. Roofs cave. Walls collapse. And through it all, the stele remains where it was last left, half shielded by a crumbling wall, partially buried by a drift of earth, untouched but not unscathed. And then, gradually, it disappears. Not by removal, not by theft, but by time. Dust settles in thick layers, stones fall, vegetation takes root. The temple roof collapses, burying the rear chamber in a slow-motion avalanche. The stele is pinned in place by a fallen lintel, wedged upright at a slight tilt. No light reaches it now. No voices fill the air around it. The silence, once symbolic, becomes total. It becomes geological. Still, the stone does not crack. The weight of the temple bears down, but the basalt holds. No fire reaches it. No flood erases it. For hundreds of years, it sleeps beneath rubble, untouched by war, weather, or worship, forgotten by the descendants of those who stole it, lost even to those who built the walls around it. Its silence becomes survival. Had it been displayed, it might have been defaced. Had it been stored with other plundered artifacts, it might have been melted, reshaped, or repurposed. But buried and misremembered, it is spared. The world forgets the man who wrote it, the city where it stood, and the legal philosophy it represents, but the stone remembers. And far above, the world changes. New empires rise and fall. New languages emerge. Roads are built over ruins. The very idea of law evolves beyond Hammurabi's definitions. And yet, unknown to all, a complete code of Bronze Age justice lies hidden in a quiet corner of an ancient city's collapsed temple. No one knows it is there. No one is looking for it. Not yet, but one day, centuries later, curious hands will arrive with pickaxes and notebooks. They will dig through mud and stone, brushing away the dust of civilizations long since vanished. They will uncover the stele and wonder aloud what it says. And when they decipher its lines, they will find something astonishing. Not just laws, but clarity. Not just a record, but a worldview. The silence will end. The stele, once buried in obscurity, will speak again. And the world, quite suddenly, will begin to listen. The ruins above shift with every season. Sunlight glints off broken columns and shattered bricks, casting long shadows across what used to be courtyards and corridors. Wind slips through the cracks of collapsed walls, carrying fine dust that settles in the corners of what once were sanctuaries. Rain, when it comes, pools in shallow depressions, darkening the stone before evaporating again under the relentless sky. The people of the region, centuries removed from the empires that once thrived here, call the site simply the Old City. They herd goats past its edges. They gather fallen bricks for cooking fires. They do not know that buried beneath these sun-baked stones lies something that once held empires accountable. The stele rests in a strange kind of stillness. Its top half remains exposed beneath a lopsided slab, caught at an angle by a tumble of supporting stones. One side is fully obscured, pressed into layers of clay and shattered roof tiles. The other remains intact, though covered in a thick crust of earth and soot. No light touches its surface. No footsteps echo nearby. Yet nothing shifts it. Not fire, not frost, not time. Other stones around it crumble. Tablets stored in the same chamber dissolve into unreadable fragments. But the stele endures, dense and patient. Above ground, the name Hammurabi is no longer spoken. Even in scholarly texts and temple records, he has vanished. His code, though once copied and studied in cities across Mesopotamia, is no longer known by name. Later empires, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, build their own systems of law, each drawing on earlier traditions without realizing how much they owe to that silent stone beneath the soil. They issue proclamations. They carve edicts. They pass decrees. And yet none match the scale, structure, or philosophical ambition of the text buried in Susa's forgotten shrine. The soil shifts slowly, layer upon layer compacting as centuries pass. Storms sweep in from the mountains and wash silt into the ruins. Seeds find places to root, their tendrils reaching through cracks and wrapping around broken columns. Animals nest in the hollowed stone chambers. The old temple becomes a mound. It blends into the hills around it. Even the outlines of the old buildings become difficult to trace. People walk past them every day, never suspecting the weight of history buried just meters below. Occasionally, a traveler or merchant pauses at the edge of the mound. There are rumors, whispered between generations, of buried gold, cursed stones, or ancient gods trapped beneath the dust. Some dig shallow holes hoping to find treasure. They uncover bits of broken pottery, the occasional carved brick, maybe even a seal or two, but nothing to hold their attention. Nothing to suggest that beneath their feet lies the oldest nearly complete legal code ever written. Eventually, they move on. When rain falls in heavy seasons, water seeps down through the soil, washing away sediment and settling into forgotten crevices. Some of it reaches the stone. The moisture leaves mineral stains along the edges of the inscription, but the core text remains readable, if only there were eyes trained to see it. In a strange way, the stone's concealment has become its greatest protection. Hidden from conquest and weather, it waits in darkness, not demanding attention, simply persisting. Time begins to turn. As the 19th century dawns and Europe enters an age of exploration and empire, new maps are drawn with old names. Archaeology emerges not just as curiosity, but as science. Scholars in Paris, London, and Berlin pore over texts from the ancient world, seeking clues to how civilization began. They dig in Egypt, in Palestine, and slowly in Mesopotamia. At first, their focus is grand ziggurats, palaces, battlefields. They search for gold, murals, myths. But eventually, a few begin to understand that what matters most is not grandeur, but continuity. They start to collect clay tablets, not for their decoration, but for their inscriptions. They begin to ask questions not just about kings and wars, but about how people lived, governed, traded, and settled disputes. Susa catches their attention again. Its mention in ancient records, including Greek sources, hints at buried wonders. A team from France begins work in the early 1900s, led by Jacques de Morgan. They expect palatial ruins and ornamental treasures. What they find instead are layers of architectural history built atop one another. Persian columns on Elamite walls, Babylonian tablets scattered among later debris. It is in this confusing blend of timelines that they find the stele standing upright, partially embedded in a wall. At first, they do not understand what they've uncovered. The cuneiform script is dense and difficult. The text is long, nearly 3,000 lines etched with such precision it seems machine-made. The scholars identify it as Babylonian, but the context is unclear. Why is such a monument here, so far from its origin? Why does it appear undamaged, unrepurposed? And what does it say? As they clean it, they see more. At the top, the familiar figure of a king receives a rod and ring from a seated deity. The image mirrors other Mesopotamian carvings, but the scale and detail are unique. The scholars work slowly, line by line, deciphering what they believe to be an epic or royal dedication. But as they move deeper into the text, the realization dawns: these are laws. Hundreds of them, covering marriage, theft, contracts, injuries, inheritance, debts, agriculture, labor, and more. This is not poetry. It is legislation, ancient and alien, but methodical and complete. One of the researchers reportedly murmurs, "It's a code, a real code." It is a moment that reshapes the field. The discovery of the stele transforms the understanding of ancient governance. Suddenly, Hammurabi is not just a name from king lists. He is a philosopher king, a system builder, a ruler who left behind more than monuments. He left principles, and not vague ideals, but concrete policies, spelled out for all to see. Justice, it turns out, was carved in stone before it was written on scrolls or printed in books. The stele is transported to France. In the halls of the Louvre, it finds itself on display for the first time in centuries. Visitors walk past, pausing at the top where the divine image glows under museum lights. Few read the rows of text stretching beneath, but that hardly matters. Scholars have already begun the work of translating and interpreting. Law schools cite it. Historians reframe timelines because of it. Entire exhibitions are built around it. And somewhere between the soft voices of curators and the scribbled notes of students, the silence of the Stele ends. Yet the years it spent beneath the rubble remain part of its mystery. Why did it survive intact when so much else was destroyed? Why was it hidden instead of broken? Did someone protect it? Or was it simply forgotten at the right time? Historians still wonder whether its burial was deliberate, a final act of reverence by a priest who knew its meaning, or accidental, the result of architectural collapse and pure chance. Either way, the result is the same: a stone that outlived the city it came from, the empire it served, and the language it speaks. It could have vanished. It could have been reduced to gravel, reused as a foundation stone, or lost in the churn of conquest. But instead, it waited, not quietly, but persistently. Every scratch, every symbol held its place. It remained whole. And when the world was finally ready to hear it again, it answered, not with myth, but with measured rules, with lines of text that still challenge and provoke, with laws that begin not with kings, but with consequences. And now that it has returned to the world's attention, it does not seek glory. It seeks context, interpretation, comparison. And for that, the next voices to speak must not be warriors or priests, but scholars. The rediscovery of the Stele is only the beginning. What matters now is how it's understood, how it's taught, and how it's remembered. For in the end, the rubble did not bury the law. It preserved it. And in doing so, it gave the modern world one last chance to read what justice looked like when it was first put in writing. The sun rises slow over the Iranian plateau, casting long shadows across the desolate ruins of Susa. A small team of French archaeologists, dressed in dusty linen and wide-brimmed hats, climbs over broken stone and cracked foundations, wielding pickaxes, brushes, and notebooks. Their movements are precise, methodical, and quiet. There are no crowds, no cameras, no promises of treasure, only the slow, careful uncovering of forgotten shapes beneath the earth. You are among them now, kneeling in the shade of a wall that hasn't stood upright in 2,000 years, brushing away soil from the base of something dark and solid, something that doesn't quite belong to the surrounding debris. At first, it looks like just another carved block, perhaps the base of a column or a reused door lintel. But as your fingers trace its edge and the brush reveals a curve, you realize there's more. The surface is too smooth. The material isn't the same sandy limestone found in other fragments nearby. It's darker, denser. You call for another brush and continue clearing around the edge. A line appears, then a groove, and then what looks like the faint suggestion of a carved figure. Someone behind you leans in and mutters, "C'est une stele," a stele, upright, unbroken, buried in the wall of a later structure. You've just uncovered something extraordinary. You and the others work carefully. There's no rush. This part of the dig isn't even listed as high priority. It was supposed to be a minor structural clearing, a side chamber of an old Elamite temple. But now, all focus shifts to this object. Over the course of several days, more of the stone is revealed. The stele stands taller than a man, weighing several tons, jet black and curved at the top. You marvel at its shape, deliberate, imposing, and beautiful in its austerity. The more you brush away, the more you see. Rows of wedge-shaped cuneiform symbols, so tightly packed they seem to ripple down the surface like the flow of an ancient river frozen in time. The workers switch from picks to smaller chisels and trowels, carving away the dirt around the base. Someone brings out a canvas to provide shade. The team begins to sketch, photograph, and measure. Then they see it, the image at the top. A king standing with hand raised in reverence. A god seated before him, holding a ring and a rod. It's a motif familiar in Babylonian iconography, but this one is more intricate, more formal. The carving isn't decorative, it's declarative. This is not just a religious image. It's a symbol of authority. The archaeologists realize, slowly, that this might be more than a dedication stele or temple marker. This might be something foundational. In Paris, the news spreads through academic circles with the slow burn of growing realization. The discovery is noted in letters, mentioned in meetings, added to formal reports. At first, it's described simply as a Mesopotamian legal inscription, long and well preserved. But as the initial translations begin trickling in, a sense of astonishment builds. The stele doesn't contain a few scattered laws. It contains nearly 300, a complete code, numbered, structured, carved from top to bottom in what seems like unbroken legal reasoning. And the name at the top? Hammurabi. For most of the modern world, the name is unfamiliar. It doesn't yet carry the weight it will soon come to hold. But for the handful of scholars working on Mesopotamian history and Akkadian language, it's a revelation. Hammurabi is known from king lists and fragmentary chronicles, bare mentions in temple inscriptions or military records. But here, for the first time, he appears not just as a conqueror or priest-king, but as a lawgiver, a philosopher with a chisel, a ruler who sat down, well, more likely commissioned someone else to sit down and carve into stone the guiding rules for a kingdom. It's an odd feeling, knowing that the dusty chamber you knelt in just weeks ago has produced something that will change the study of ancient law forever. But that's exactly what's happened. As translation teams work line by line through the text, the structure of the code begins to emerge. These aren't mystical sayings or vague edicts. They're clauses, specific, conditional, and unapologetically blunt. If a man puts out the eye of another man, his eye shall be put out. If a builder constructs a house that collapses and kills the owner, the builder shall be slain. It's not metaphor, it's policy. The stone is justice, literalized. You sit in the Louvre years later, staring up at the stele where it now stands under soft lighting, encased in a chamber built to protect it. Tourists pass by, snapping photos and admiring the artwork. Many glance at the figure at the top, but few bend low enough to read the thousands of lines stretching beneath. You know what they say. You know the fierce and calculated logic they contain. And it's difficult not to feel a kind of awe, not because the laws are perfect, but because they're deliberate. Ancient justice is suddenly more than an idea. It has weight. You can see it, read it, run your fingers across it. You can imagine the sound of the chisels striking the stone, the dust rising in waves as each letter is shaped, the breath of the scribe as he labors in the heat. Back in Susa, the site is quieter now. The dust is settled. The stone is gone, carted away for preservation and study. But for a few days, the temple breathed again. The moment the stele rose into view, blinking under daylight for the first time in nearly 3,000 years, it took the air from everyone nearby. Even the workers, though they couldn't read a word, paused. Some touched it with a kind of respect, unsure what it was, but knowing it mattered. The silence around the stone hadn't been emptiness. It had been waiting. Historians debate whether the Elamites knew what they were stealing when they took the stele, whether they understood the laws or simply saw it as a symbol of Babylonian greatness. But it no longer matters. By carrying it east, by hiding it away, by inadvertently preserving it, they saved something the world wasn't yet ready to lose. And it took a French pickaxe, swung in an otherwise forgotten room of a forgotten temple, to bring it back into the light. Stele's rediscovery reshapes not just our understanding of Hammurabi, but of law itself. The code becomes a reference point, one of the earliest known attempts to define justice, outline responsibility, and formalize consequence. Its influence is traced in later legal traditions, its tone echoed in modern legal reasoning, and yet it remains uniquely Mesopotamian, direct, stern, tangible. The laws don't ask for interpretation. They declare, they command, they warn. And so the Stele stands again, no longer buried, no longer voiceless. It speaks not with the breath of priests, but with the eyes of readers. It's no longer just a stone. It's a sentence, held for centuries, now finally read aloud. From here, the story doesn't end. In fact, it begins to ripple. The Stele becomes a subject of lectures, textbooks, documentaries. Its clauses are debated in classrooms and courts. And with that, the Code of Hammurabi takes on a new life, not only as an object of study, but as a mirror, a reflection of how we think about justice, power, and the rules we carve into the world. As the modern world turns its gaze backward, seeking roots for its most fundamental institutions, it finds them in the dark basalt of an ancient stone, still standing, still legible, still sharp. You sit at a wide wooden desk beneath the flickering gaslight of a Paris library, a magnifying lens in one hand and a stack of reference tablets beside you. The room smells of paper, leather, and ink, dry, methodical scents that mirror the work at hand. In front of you lies a long transcription of the Stele, its cuneiform wedges, carefully copied line by line. The original Stele is too massive, too precious to bring to every academic session, so teams of epigraphers have created detailed rubbings and clay impressions. From these, the long and often maddening process of translation begins. The first thing you notice is the structure. Unlike most ancient texts, messy collections of myth, riddle, and prayer, this one is a machine, logical, ordered. Each clause flows into the next with uncanny deliberation. You begin at the prologue, where Hammurabi lays out his divine mandate, his right to rule, and his purpose in composing this legal code. There is poetry here, but it's purposeful. It's not merely to dazzle. It's to affirm his authority, to remind every reader, even centuries later, that these words were not suggestions. They were declarations. They were, in every sense, a threat carved in stone. You move deeper into the clauses, and their brutal clarity sharpens. If a man breaks the bone of another man, his own bone shall be broken. You pause, you translate, you double-check the Akkadian. There's no ambiguity. It's eye for eye, limb for limb. Not metaphor, not allegory. You underline it and continue. Each clause begins with the same conditional phrase. If a man, sometimes it is if a woman, or if a servant, but always it is hypothetical action followed by absolute consequence. There are no exceptions listed, no mitigating circumstances, only behavior and penalty. Theft, debt, adultery, contract breach, family inheritance. Each offense has its punishment. And with each line, you feel the chill of ancient certainty pressing in. These weren't just warnings. They were promises. If you cross the line, the response is not debate. It is retaliation. As the translators around you work in parallel, more of the legal world of Hammurabi takes shape. Property law is outlined with stunning complexity. Fees, loans, interest rates, everything is regulated. Farmers who neglect irrigation canals, merchants who short customers, builders who construct faulty roofs. Every possibility is addressed, often in ways that are unnervingly specific. And as you decode the text, you realize something else. This wasn't meant for scholars or scribes. It was meant for everyone. The stele's height, placement, and visibility made sure of that. It wasn't buried in temple libraries. It was posted in the public square. But here's the twist. The language is formal, dense, and almost impossible to understand without training. Even if you were a Babylonian laborer walking past it, would you really have been able to decipher it? Some historians begin to argue that the Stele wasn't there to be read. It was there to be seen. A monument of warning, a stone threat. The message wasn't know the law. The message was remember who holds the power. And so the translation becomes not just a scholarly exercise, but a philosophical one. The code is not interested in mercy. It is interested in order. It operates on the assumption that chaos is always one broken contract away. That punishments are harsh because the world is harsh. When you read the clause that says a son who strikes his father shall have his hand cut off, your pen hovers over the paper. You write it out slowly, knowing what it implies, not just about discipline, but about how far society will go to preserve the roles it depends on. Still, there are surprises. Amid the brutality, you find elements of logic, early versions of presumption of innocence, protection for widows and orphans, stipulations for fair wages, accountability for professionals. There is a moral architecture beneath the harshness. Hammurabi didn't simply want to scare his people into obedience. He wanted to embed expectations. He wanted to standardize justice. The violence of the consequences wasn't random. It was ritualized, predictable. And in that predictability, there was security. Yet the more you translate, the more the code begins to feel like a conversation between power and fear. Who enforces the law? Who interprets it? Who benefits from it? When you reach the laws that separate penalties based on social class, the balance tips. A noble who blinds a commoner pays silver. A commoner who blinds a noble loses his eye. Here, justice is not blind. It has sharp eyes and a strong sense of hierarchy. One night, while comparing tablets, you and a colleague debate a particular phrase about oxen and field damage. You notice a subtle variation in the wording. One tablet uses shall pay, while another uses shall replace. It may seem minor, but it changes the meaning. Does the violator owe restitution or equivalent goods? You debate for hours. And that's when it hits you. Even now, in the calm of a modern study, the law is not stable. It breathes. It shifts under your attention. What must it have felt like in ancient Babylon, with real lives hanging in the balance? Some parts of the text remain elusive. Symbols weathered away. Terms with no clear modern equivalent. You note these uncertainties in the margins. Historians still wonder whether certain clauses were symbolic or literal. Did a merchant who cheated a buyer really have his hand amputated every time? Or was the threat meant to deter rather than punish? No one knows for certain. The stone doesn't explain itself. It merely states. Even the final epilogue offers no comfort. Hammurabi addresses the future directly. He warns future kings not to alter his words. He curses those who might dare to erase his legacy or soften his punishments. He calls down gods upon them. It's a strange moment, an ancient ruler speaking across millennia, shaking a stone finger at the ages to come. You almost laugh, then you stop yourself. The tome is too serious. The man believed in his code with terrifying sincerity. Eventually, you set down your stylus, rub your eyes, and look again at the long scroll of translated lines. They stare back at you like the grooves of a machine, precise, cold, and enduring. The code hasn't aged. Only the world around it has. And as you read through the final clauses once more, you realize this isn't just a legal document. It's a worldview. It tells you what a civilization feared, what it valued, and what it believed justice should feel like. Not kind, not forgiving, but measurable. The translation is finished, but the interpretation has only begun. Law professors, theologians, politicians, and philosophers will debate its meaning for generations. And for you, that old basalt stele will never again be just a relic. It will always be a voice, ancient, clear, and eerily calm, whispering that power and justice have always shared the same uneasy bed. And now, with the text decoded and its message returned to the world, one final question lingers in your mind. Did Hammurabi believe in justice? Or did he simply fear its absence? It's strange how quickly a chunk of stone can become something more. When the Stele of Hammurabi was first hauled out of the ruins of Susa and dusted off under the desert sun, it was simply a marvel, an ancient curiosity, heavy with symbols, mysterious in meaning. But once it reached Paris, once the scholars translated its every line and laid bare its dense legal marrow, it began to change. Not in form, but in presence. You notice it one day while standing in the Louvre, surrounded by whispers and half a dozen languages. The stele is no longer merely ancient, it's iconic, not just a remnant of history, but a symbol of civilization itself. Over the years, the Code of Hammurabi gains a life far beyond anything its original sculptors, or even the king himself, could have imagined. Copies are made, not just in plaster and print, but in textbooks, courthouse murals, and even classroom posters. You spot it replicated in bronze outside a law school in Chicago. You see a stylized version carved into a university wall in Berlin. It begins to appear everywhere justice is discussed, wherever the history of law is taught. It has become, quite inadvertently, the face of ancient order. You sit in a quiet seminar room as a professor runs a hand across a replica of the upper register, pausing at the image of Hammurabi standing before Shamash. The class is quiet. The room smells faintly of old paper and chalk dust. The professor talks about divine authority, about the iconography of justice, about how this image shaped the very idea of kingly legitimacy in the ancient world. But as you watch, it occurs to you that no one in this room is thinking about broken hands or borrowed oxen. They're thinking about ideals, about justice as a concept, floating far above its painful realities. And this, you realize, is part of the Stele's transformation. It is no longer tied only to Babylonian canals and dusty courtrooms. It has transcended that. It has become a template, a metaphor, a kind of intellectual scaffolding for everything modern law claims to be. And yet, if you tilt your head just slightly, you can still glimpse the reality behind the ideal. You still see the clauses that separate nobles from peasants, that punish a poor man's theft with death and a rich man's with a fine. The icon may gleam now under museum lights, but the laws it holds remain stubbornly concrete. The Louvre gives it a place of honor, not hidden away in some back room of Mesopotamian odds and ends, but proudly displayed. Tourists stop to stare. Some read the plaques. Many take photos. They speak its name in reverent tones, Hammurabi, as though it's a spell from a lost world. The stele stands tall, its curved top brushing the light. Even encased in a protective barrier, it looms, as if daring you to try to ignore it. The translation beside it is abridged, of course. They can't very well display all 282 laws, so they pick the most famous ones. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. If a builder's house collapses, it's those phrases that echo through culture the most. You hear them in movies, in courtrooms, in political speeches. They're invoked as if they sum up all ancient law, as if they represent the start of legal civilization. But if you've studied the text, and you have, you know that's only part of the picture. The code is detailed, bureaucratic, and often painfully practical. It's not poetic, it's administrative. It's filled with transactions, exceptions, fees, and formulas. And yet, somehow, it has taken on the aura of a sacred text. Perhaps because it is old, perhaps because it is carved, or perhaps because it is so unapologetically clear. That clarity is seductive. In an age of legal fine print and layered interpretations, there's something comforting about a law that says exactly what it means. No room for debate. No need for a jury. If you knock out someone's tooth, yours goes next. Simple, brutal, balanced. Or at least, it seems that way. But then you remember, it only applies if you and the other person are equals. If you're not, the balance breaks. Nobles pay silver. Commoners lose limbs. Women face harsher penalties than men. Servants have almost no protection at all. It's justice, yes, but stratified, unequal, hierarchical. That's the part of the Stele that rarely makes it into the public story. The myth of Hammurabi as a visionary king, the benevolent lawgiver, the ancient architect of order, that's what people cling to. You see it in the way schools teach him. He's grouped with Moses and Solon, as if their goals were the same. But Moses carved commandments into tablets. Hammurabi commissioned laws into stone. One claimed divine morality, the other civil authority. One warned of sin, the other outlined consequences for property damage. They are not the same, but time has sanded down the nuance. You leaf through a coffee table book in a museum shop. There's Hammurabi, again, this time painted in regal colors, holding a stylized rod of law. The image is modern, idealized, fictional. But the message is clear. This man brought justice. You close the book and look again at the Stele itself, standing dark and silent just beyond the glass. It doesn't speak. It never has. It only waits to be read. Later, in a city courthouse far from Paris or Babylon, you sit in the hallway beneath a framed image of the Stele. A plaque beneath it calls it the first code of law. It's a simplification, of course. Other laws existed before Hammurabi, Ur-Nammu, Lipit-Ishtar, but none were so grand, so deliberately public, so fully preserved. The myth survives not because it is accurate, but because it is tidy. A beginning must have a symbol, and Hammurabi, with his rod and ring and his mountains of rules, fits the bill. You listen as a young lawyer tells a colleague how the code proves that law is timeless. You smile faintly, thinking of the clause about cutting off a son's hand for striking his father. You wonder if the lawyer knows that one. Probably not. The Stele has long since moved from law to symbol, from practice to principle. And in doing so, it has acquired a kind of diplomatic immunity from critique. Who wants to argue with a legend carved in stone? But beneath the polished myth, the practical reality remains. The code wasn't written for fairness. It was written for order, for clarity, for control. It's why the clauses are numbered, why the text is dense, why the punishments are so sharp. Hammurabi didn't want flexibility. He wanted predictability. He wasn't afraid of crime. He was afraid of chaos. And perhaps that's why, even now, in a world filled with ever-evolving legal codes and constitutions, the Stele still holds power. It's a reminder that every law, no matter how sophisticated, begins as a decision. Someone, somewhere, deciding how the world should work and who must suffer when it doesn't. As you leave the museum and step into the quiet evening, the image of the Stele lingers in your mind, not as a relic, not even as a monument, but as a message, cold, sharp, and enduring. You picture its surface gleaming faintly under torchlight in ancient Babylon, under lantern light in Susa, and now under halogen bulbs in the Louvre. Always silent, always watching. And now, as we shift our gaze once more, the final corner of the story waits, where the code meets the messy reality of social inequality, where the powerful find ways to soften the laws that break others, where justice, though carved in stone, turns out to have different edges depending on who's holding it. You wait before dawn, shoulders stiff from a night spent on a mat of bundled reeds. The light hasn't quite reached the fields, but the air is already thick with the scent of dust, livestock, and the slow heat of another Babylonian morning. Today is planting day, which means the plow must be ready, the oxen fed, and the channels of the irrigation canal opened in just the right order. You rise quietly, careful not to disturb the others, and step into the courtyard to inspect the plow, your most valuable tool, your livelihood, your fragile link to next season's barley. And it's broken. The yoke is cracked clean through the wood. The iron ring slipped from its binding, the haft warped just enough that it can't be repaired on the spot. You kneel beside it in disbelief. You only used it yesterday. There was no sign of strain. But the night air, damp and bitter with rot from the river's edge, must have worked into the wood, swelling it until the stress snapped it clean. Or maybe, and here your suspicion turns cold, someone tampered with it. You eye the neighbor's compound across the narrow path. He's planted early this year, and with the canal water being shared, your delay means his fields get the better flow. It's not an accusation you can voice aloud, not without proof, but the thought lingers. You think of the code. You've read it. You know the clause. If a man destroys the plow of another man, he shall pay silver equal to its worth. But knowing the law is not the same as having someone enforce it. And the Stele doesn't plow your field. You try binding the yoke with spare rope. It holds barely, but the oxen resist. They sense the weakness. The sun climbs higher. The field, already late, must be furrowed before midday or the season is lost. You set to work anyway, coaxing the plow forward, hands blistering with every jolt. The soil is dry and resistant. Each turn of the blade sends up sprays of dust and small stones. Behind you, your son drags the water skins to the edge of the ditch. The day grinds forward in painful inches. By the time a passing official arrives to collect the irrigation tax, you're covered in sweat and silty grime. He holds a clay tablet and a stylus, ticking names as he passes each plot. You try to explain the damage. You try to ask for a delay in the levy. He shrugs. The water came. That's all we measure. You point to the broken plow. He squints at it, uninterested. Speak to the scribe, he says, if you think you were wronged. But you know what happens next. The scribe will ask for a formal complaint. You'll need a witness. You'll need to state the damage, provide the name of the suspect. You'll have to swear an oath. If you accuse falsely, you might be fined, or worse. If you're right but can't prove it, the neighbor walks free. And even if you succeed, the silver won't come today. It may not come at all. You begin to wonder if it's worth it. That's the thing about the code. It exists. It's visible. It's carved into public stone, but it doesn't move quickly. It doesn't fix broken wood or feed your oxen. It exists not for the urgency of daily survival, but for the pacing of order. It is slow, procedural, weighted down by thresholds you rarely have time to cross. Back in the field, your younger daughter brings a cool cloth for your neck. She doesn't ask about the plow. She only sees your exhaustion. You press on. You tie more rope around the cracked yoke, muttering prayers to the gods of the ditch and the furrow. You remember a clause, one you'd almost forgotten, about compensation for faulty tools sold at market. It makes you wonder again if your neighbor might have replaced your gear in the night, swapped it for a damaged one. But it's too late now. No one saw. No one will care. By the afternoon, you've managed to crook a grid across the eastern half of the field. It's enough to plant, but not well. The ridges are uneven. The water will pool. The seed may rot. You'll need luck now and a better yoke by next week. Your son asks whether the gods will be angry with the planting pattern. You say no, but you're not sure. At supper, under the fading sky, you speak with your brother about filing a complaint. He shakes his head. Do you have proof? You don't. Then you'll waste a day in the court for nothing. He leans in. Pay the carpenter for a new haft. Bind it yourself. And if it breaks again, then file. 2 breaks is a pattern. 1 is just luck or bad timber. This too is law of a sort. The unwritten kind. The kind that governs those who don't have scribes in their family or silver to spare. The kind that works in glances and favors, and who owes whom a favor from the last planting season. You sigh and agree. The code is there, yes, but it is distant. You live beneath it, not within it. Later that night, you find yourself staring at the copy of the law your cousin brought from the city. It's etched on a small clay tablet, barely legible by firelight. You scan the lines until your eyes land on the one you need. It's there, plain as anything. If a man is responsible for the destruction of a tool vital to another's harvest, he shall restore its value. You mouth the words. They're comforting in their certainty, but they don't bind the wind. They don't replace the wood, and they certainly don't stop another crack in the night. Still, you place the tablet back on the shelf, careful not to drop it, because it matters. Not because the law always helps you, but because it says you are part of something bigger than a broken plow. It says you have a place, even if small, in a world that once tried, however imperfectly, to write fairness into stone. And tomorrow, as you rise before the sun again, you'll step into your field, knowing that the odds are tilted, that the law bends with pressure, that justice might only arrive when the harvest is already lost. But still, you'll plant. Still, you'll bind the yoke. Because even in a world where the law is slow and the plow breaks in silence, life goes on. And you carry both burdens, the soil and the system, because no one else will. The next morning, you wake again to the groan of wooden wheels and the low murmur of oxen. And though the plow is still weak and the complaint still unsent, you're already walking back into the field. You don't know if the laws of Hammurabi will ever help you, but you know they're watching. And now, let's follow that gaze from the fields to the heart of the city, where merchants in fine robes play by different rules entirely. One's not carved in stone, but whispered in courtyards and weighed in silver. It's a different world behind the merchant walls. The sun still rises over Babylon, casting its golden light across the canals and rooftops, but it shines differently here. The plastered courtyards of the merchant class feel cleaner, brighter, more deliberate. The dust is kept at bay by hired boys with reed brooms. The water jars are always full. And the laws, the same laws carved deep into the basalt stele, take on an entirely different shape in these shaded gardens of privilege. You can feel it in the way people speak, in the way problems are handled quietly before a scribe is ever called. You sit beneath a fig tree in a merchant's home, watching two men argue over a shipment of copper that arrived 3 days late. The delivery was damaged. Some of the ingots were waterlogged, ruined from a leaky boat and poor sealing. The buyer is angry, but not desperate. The seller shrugs and offers silver to cover the loss. They consult a contract, sealed with the merchant's own cylinder stamp. It states the goods were to be protected against water damage. The penalty is clear. Compensation in silver, agreed upon in advance. And just like that, it's settled. No shouting, no officials. No public hearing under the king's scribes. No humiliating oath before Shamash. Just a handshake and a few pieces of silver clinking onto a scale. You realize that for people like this, the law is not about justice. It's about risk management. It's a cost baked into the deal. A delay here, a penalty there, and life continues uninterrupted. Now compare that with the day before, when your cousin's neighbor, a reed cutter from the outer quarter, was dragged to the temple gate for accidentally damaging a nobleman's boat. The penalty was steep. The man had no silver, so the magistrate proposed an alternative. His son, barely 10, would be taken into debt labor until the value of the damage was repaid. It could take years. No contract, no negotiation. Just judgment and compliance. And both men, the merchant with his copper and the reed cutter with his son, are said to live under the same law. You watch a servant bring wine into the merchant's garden, stepping carefully around a painted tile mosaic that depicts Hammurabi receiving the rod of kingship. The irony isn't lost on you. In this house, the rod isn't a symbol of punishment. It's a symbol of protection. The law, when spoken in these courtyards, feels more like a business strategy than a moral force. And it works. These merchants know the clauses better than most scribes. They keep clay tablets of every transaction, hire their own copyists, and make sure their contracts are stamped and duplicated. They don't trust justice, they preempt it. You once heard a nobleman joke that the Code of Hammurabi has two versions, the one carved in stone and the one written on clay by men with money. You laughed then, but now it feels uncomfortably close to the truth. Because when disputes arise among the elite, the law is flexible. There are always workarounds. A bribe to the court scribe, a favor to a temple official, an apology delivered with a gift of oil or fine linen. Legal outcomes drift depending on who is asking and how much they can afford to lose. This isn't to say the code is meaningless. Not at all. In fact, its very existence gives the appearance of balance. When a merchant cites Clause 48 to justify postponing a loan due to flood damage, or Clause 100 to secure compensation for a dishonest courier, the stone is invoked, the law upheld. But beneath the precision, the machinery of wealth quietly shifts the weights. For every man who gets silver, there's another who gets silence or suffering. There's a story told in the taverns about a butcher who shorted a priest on a cut of lamb. The priest, incensed, accused him of fraud. The code calls for stiff penalties for dishonest trade, especially when sacred goods are involved. The butcher was fined, of course, but not heavily. Why? Because the priest and the butcher's father-in-law had long-standing ties. Because the temple needed meat. Because the priest received a new cloak the following week. The law was followed, but only in form, not in spirit. Historians still wonder whether Hammurabi intended this inequality or simply accepted it. Was the tiered nature of the code a different punishment for nobles, commoners, and servants, his idea of fairness? Or was it a reflection of the world as it was, not as it should be? The laws don't say. They only assign consequences. They do not explain their rationale. You walk through the bazaar as night falls, hearing disputes rise over prices, weights, deliveries. You pass a spice seller arguing with a transporter over a lost bundle of cardamom. Clause 271, he shouts. It's your responsibility. The transporter grimaces, offering a palm full of coin. The buyer grunts and accepts. No magistrate is summoned. No priest consulted. The law is cited, not enforced. It's used like a measuring stick, or sometimes like a stick to wave around until someone agrees to settle. At the edge of the bazaar, a beggar sits with bandaged hands. Word spreads he stole a pair of fish from a vendor's stall. The punishment, according to the code, was removal of the offending limb. But the vendor spared him, said the fish weren't worth the trouble. Still, the beggar was beaten by the city guards anyway. As a warning, no trial, no citation, no clause, just bruises and silence. It's these invisible gradations that shape daily life. Wealth doesn't just soften consequences, it rewrites them. A noble who strikes a commoner might owe silver. A commoner who strikes a noble might owe his life. A poor woman accused of slander may be thrown into the river. A wealthy man accused of the same might make a temple donation and call it resolved. You begin to understand that the code, for all its grandeur, was never meant to level the playing field. It was meant to codify its slopes. And yet, in some strange way, even that codification provides stability. People know where they stand. They may not like the rank they were born into, but the rules are clear, predictable. A poor man may suffer more, but at least he knows what's coming. And knowledge, even painful knowledge, offers a strange comfort. It's when the rules bend in secret that real fear begins. You find yourself wondering if this was Hammurabi's true brilliance, not in creating a fair system, but a consistent one. A system that could be memorized, studied, invoked. A system whose inequalities were not hidden, but chiseled into public stone for all to see. Justice, imperfect and stratified, but visible. As you leave the market, the moon rises over the rooftops. Somewhere behind the palace walls, a merchant scribes another contract, careful to mark every clause. Somewhere in the slums, a farmer sells his daughter's necklace to settle a debt. And somewhere in between, the code looms, not as a shield, not as a sword, but as a mirror. And now, we descend from the courtyards of the privileged into the silent chambers where law becomes survival, where women, too often overlooked by the system, face justice not as a right, but as a gamble. The alley behind the midwife's house is quiet, the kind of quiet that hums with secrets. A clay pot sits cooling in the shade, still streaked with blood, and the faint scent of boiled linen clings to the doorway. You step through slowly, ducking beneath the hanging herbs and into the warm, dim interior, where life and law collide in the most intimate of spaces. The woman inside, older, sharp-eyed, her hair bound in a tight knot, barely glances up from the jar she's sealing. She's done this before. Hundreds of births, most without incident. But not last night. Because last night, something went wrong. You feel it in the way she doesn't speak at first. Only gestures for you to sit on the reed mat beside her. The silence stretches out, filled with the steady buzz of flies beyond the shutters, and the sound of a baby crying from the next room. Not the baby. This one lived. The one from last night didn't. Or so the midwife says. But there's no body. That's the problem. And in Hammurabi's Babylon, that's not just a tragedy. It's a legal crisis. The code has a clause. Of course it does. If a woman hires a midwife, and the child is lost under suspicious circumstances, the midwife shall swear an oath before the gods. It's written plainly, but the consequences are not. If the family believes she's lying, they can accuse her of theft, of harm, even of child selling. The penalties range from silver fines to death by drowning. Midwives hold fragile positions, vital, trusted, but never entirely safe. Their work is sacred and suspect at the same time. And now this one sits with her knees drawn up, waiting for a decision. The mother, still weak and feverish, lies in the next room. She remembers pain, blood, a long silence, and then nothing. The midwife says the baby was born still. The family says there's no proof. You're here because you know both sides. You're no judge, not officially, but your voice carries weight in the neighborhood. You saw the midwife last week with another child, one born healthy, strong. You saw how she handled it. You trusted her. But now, doubt spreads like river silt after a storm. She offers her version calmly. The child was born blue, no breath. The mother collapsed. There was no time for ceremony. She burned the remains quickly, as tradition sometimes allows in emergencies. But the ashes are gone, and no witness was present. The father, returning late, found only silence and a single wet cloth left hanging on the line. The code is harsh when life vanishes without record, because life, especially the life of a child, represents wealth, legacy, inheritance, labor, and honor. The suspicion is not always about grief. Sometimes it's about what's been lost in practical terms. A male child gone means fewer hands in the field. A daughter gone means fewer bridal negotiations. You know this. Everyone does. So accusations fly easily, even when sadness is fresh. A neighbor mentions seeing the midwife speaking with a temple servant earlier that day, one who works in the orphan shelter outside the walls. Whispers swirl. Could she have sold the baby? Could she have lied to the mother? The rumors tangle with fear and start to feel like facts. You ask the midwife if she will swear the oath. She stiffens. Oaths are serious, not just formalities. To swear falsely before Shamash or Marduk is to invite divine punishment, misfortune, illness, death. But refusing to swear looks worse. She nods slowly and agrees. At the temple, she kneels beside a basin of sacred water, hands shaking slightly. The priest reads the charge aloud, that she knowingly concealed the child's fate, that she may have profited from it. The air is heavy with incense and unease. She swears the oath. She calls upon the gods to strike her down if she lies. Nothing happens, of course. Not yet. Not in any visible way. The crowd outside is not satisfied. The father wants justice. The mother, pale and distant, says nothing. You sense a fracture forming. The law has been followed, but not resolved. The code offers structure, but not closure. The truth, if it exists, is buried in a night of fever and pain. Historians still wonder how often justice under the code meant simply restoring appearances, checking boxes, repeating formulas, declaring oaths. There were few tools for truth-seeking beyond the divine and the testimonial. If a god didn't strike someone dead, it was taken as a kind of verdict. But you know, people lie. And sometimes gods remain silent. The midwife returns home alone. Her work may continue, but her reputation now carries a shadow. Some will trust her still. Others will find someone else. And should another baby die under her watch, it won't matter what the code says. She be condemned before the first oath is spoken. You visit the mother days later. She's recovering, slowly. She asks if the baby cried. You don't know what to say. You weren't there. You only know the story you were told. You say something gentle, something that might be true. She closes her eyes and nods, as if accepting that the answer doesn't matter now. What's lost is lost. Back outside, you walk past the edge of the canal, where reed cutters laugh and call to each other. Life continues. The code remains etched on stone, unchanging. But the way people live beneath it, twisting, surviving, guessing at the motives of those around them, remains as fluid as the river. And as you cross back toward the center of town, you pass a girl of perhaps 13 seated near the market wall, her wrists bound with a thin cord of dyed flax. She doesn't cry. She doesn't speak. A debt, someone says. Her father's. She work it off in the merchant's house. Another clause in the code. Another form of justice. Which brings us next to the quiet world of household sentences, where women, wives, and daughters navigate the code not in court, but within the invisible walls of duty, silence, and obedience. The tablet is heavy in your hand, thicker than you expected, stamped at both ends with the neat, swirling imprint of a merchant seal. You sit at the edge of a pillared courtyard, waiting for the scribe to return with your copy. The day is already hot, the stone beneath you warmed through your robes, and the sour smell of clay ink hangs in the still air. You're not here for your own contract. You're here as a witness, the kind that gives a transaction weight. And the man at the center of this deal, tall, manicured, dressed in pale linen with coal lining his eyes, doesn't like to leave things to chance. His contract isn't about marriage or labor. It's about ownership. More precisely, about ownership of a wife. The groom is wealthy. Not nobility, but close. He has 3 oxen, 2 warehouses on the canal, and a steady stream of silver from grain exports. This marriage solidifies an alliance with another rising family. The bride is 17, educated, quiet, and seated 2 cushions away, flanked by a female attendant. She says nothing during the negotiations. Her father does all the speaking. You've seen this process before. You know how the code treats it. The marriage contract is not just a formality. It's a legal document, carefully worded and sealed, filled with clauses that determine everything from dowry rights to consequences for adultery. There's one about infertility, one about divorce, one about what happens if the husband takes a second wife, which, legally, he may do. The tablet will later be baked and stored in a family shrine or temple archive. Not for sentimental reasons, but for protection. Because when things go wrong, and they often do, the tablet becomes the first voice in the room. You glance at the clause just added by the scribe. It states that if the wife bears no children within 2 years, the husband may take a concubine. If the wife becomes ill, the husband may separate her into a second household. If she leaves without cause, she forfeits her dowry. These are not new ideas. They've been on tablets like this for generations, but seeing them pressed into wet clay makes them feel colder, more final. And yet, for the rich, these contracts are shields. They prevent scandal. They reduce emotion to record. They make it harder for anyone, wives, daughters, in-laws, to claim injury without evidence. The Stell's laws support this. Clause 138, for instance, states that if a man divorces a wife who has borne him children, he must return her dowry and give her custody unless she was proven unfaithful. Clause 142 says that if a woman despises her husband and wishes to leave, she must present her case and face judgment. In theory, there's balance. In practice, it depends on who's holding the tablet and who can afford the better scribe. Later that evening, you see the bride's mother at the water station, washing linens with practiced hands. You ask how she feels about the match. She hesitates, then says, "At least she have a house of her own." You sense that's the only part of this she's allowed to be pleased about. It's not that the family lacks affection, but affection is not written into law. Only property is. The next morning, news spreads that another woman, also married to a wealthy man, was caught speaking privately with a cousin near the temple. Her husband claims it was suspicious. The code, again, is clear. If a married woman is caught in the act of adultery, both she and the man must be bound and thrown into the river, unless the husband chooses to pardon her. That choice is his alone. But in this case, there was no act. Just talk, just whispers. And so the punishment is not death, but confinement. She'll remain indoors until the matter is forgotten, her visits to the market limited, her movements recorded by the household servant. No clause governs this outcome. No tablet outlines the hours she must now spend watching the shadows change on the same four walls. It's not justice carved in stone. It's justice lived in silence. You begin to notice the differences in how contracts operate across the city. For the poor, contracts are rare, only drawn in the direst of circumstances. A field lease, a loan, a desperate pledge of labor. For the rich, contracts are everywhere. They accumulate like dust in the corners of tiled rooms. Some are never enforced. Others are invoked with precision. You once heard of a man who kept 12 tablets outlining contingency plans for every possible insult his brother-in-law might hurl at a feast. He used one. The others remained quietly archived, just in case. Historians still debate whether this proliferation of personal law made Babylon more just or merely more bureaucratic. Was it a society of order or a society of preemption? Did contracts empower the powerless or only protect the powerful from them? The answers aren't in the tablets. They're in the spaces between them. You visit the scribe a week later, watching him press another groom's name into clay. This one is younger, less confident, and insists on adding a line that says if his wife bears a son, she will receive a gold necklace. The scribe smirks. "That is not required," he says. "I want it anyway," the groom replies, "and so it's added." The code does not forbid kindness. It simply does not require it. That night, as you pass a courtyard where musicians are rehearsing for the wedding, you wonder how many of these celebrations hide quiet contracts beneath their joy. How many brides carry invisible clauses in their futures, tucked between the fine lines of law and expectation. You walk past the shrine where clay tablets are stored, hundreds of them, some cracked, some unreadable, some still bearing the fingerprints of those who wrote them. You wonder how many of those tablets were held by women. How many bore the names of those who would never speak them aloud. And as you round the corner toward the lower district, you begin to hear rumors, soft and uncertain, of a woman cast out without cause. No contract, no accusation, just a whisper, a suspicion, and a missing dowry. The code should protect her, but whether it will is another matter. Which brings us next into the realm of legal survival. When protection fails, when the letter of the law is used against those it was meant to shield. And when silence becomes the only defense left, the first thing you notice is the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the watchful kind. The silence of someone who knows every word could be dangerous. You pass through the shaded inner courtyard of a wealthy house, sandals brushing against cool stone, and pause near the servant quarters. The servant girl is there, no more than 15, kneeling over a basin, her hands raw from scrubbing linens in the bitter lye water. She doesn't look up. She never does. And you've started to wonder if she even remembers how to meet a stranger's eyes. She was sold into this household 2 years ago. Her father owed a debt he couldn't repay, and the code made it clear. If a man owes silver and cannot pay, he may sell his wife, his children, or even himself into servitude. It is written plainly, clause after clause. There's no shame in it, not officially. It's just a system, a mechanism for balance. But standing here now, watching her fingers tremble from the cold, you realize there's a vast difference between legality and justice. She's not beaten, not visibly. Her master prides himself on being civilized. He feeds his servants, provides shelter, occasionally even gives them festival days off. But control doesn't always look like a fist. Sometimes it's a locked door, a withheld name, a whispered threat about being sold to a harsher master in the provinces. The law allows it. The code protects the owner's rights. It even limits the servant's movements. She may not leave without permission. She may not marry. She may not testify in court unless spoken for. And yet, even here, there are rules. If she is injured by another, her master may be compensated. If she bears a child, certain clauses are triggered, especially if the father is free. That's where things get complicated. There's another servant in the house, a hired man, not bound by servitude. You've seen how he looks at her, not cruelly, more like a man trying to pretend he isn't looking at all. And you've seen her glance back, just once, just briefly. If anything happens, if a child comes from that glance, the code will have its say. If the master accepts the child, she might gain her freedom one day. If not, both she and the man could face punishment. You think of Clause 146. If a man has intercourse with a servant woman in the house of another man, without the knowledge of her owner, and she bears children, the man must pay silver, and the children belong to the owner. It's transactional, like everything else. Children as property, silver as consequence. No room for feeling, no room for fear. And yet, fear is the undercurrent of everything here. She doesn't speak because she knows how fragile her position is. If she complains, she could be sold. If she's accused, she won't be heard. If she disappears, no one will ask questions because the code doesn't require anyone to. You sit near the corner of the courtyard, pretending to admire the pomegranate tree, but really, you're listening. The servant girl hums softly under her breath, a lullaby from a region far to the east. You know the words. Your grandmother used to sing it. That tells you something. Tells you where she came from. The empire is wide, and its debts run deep. You remember a case from a year ago. A servant accused her master of cruelty, of locking her in a granary for 3 days without food. The court listened. The master denied it. She had no witness, no injuries to prove it. The case was dropped. The next month, she was gone. Sent north, people said. Sold to a brickmaker. Historians still wonder how often servants used the law to defend themselves, and how often they dared not try. Some tablets record rare cases of manumission, of a master freeing a loyal servant or a woman being allowed to marry. But more often, the records show silence. Transfers of ownership, breaches of labor, escapes. You've heard whispers in the back alleys about a group that helps runaway servants, smugglers, some call them. Saints, say others. They hide the fugitives in riverboats or temple kitchens. It's dangerous work. If caught, the servant is returned and punished, and the helper may be fined or imprisoned. But still, the whispers persist. You wonder what it would take for this girl to run. How far she'd have to go. Whether she even knows the city well enough to find help. Whether she still believes help exists. There's a moment, just a flicker, when she glances your way and meets your eyes. It's not a plea. Not exactly. More like a question. Do you see me? Do you understand? And you do. You wish you didn't, but you do. Later that day, you overhear her name spoken in the kitchen for the first time. A cook mentions that she worked faster today, says she's growing into her role. The phrase is meant as praise, but it lands like a weight, growing into her role, as if this is something one should grow into, as if this is where life is meant to root and spread. That night, you see her briefly while passing the servants' quarters again. She sits by the fire pit, legs drawn up, eyes reflecting the red light. She's not humming anymore, just staring. And behind her, carved into a support beam, you notice a line of marks, tallies, maybe. One for each week, or month, or day. You don't ask. You don't need to. Because you know, in this house, the code is not protection. It is a frame, a boundary, one that can be pressed against, but rarely escaped. And as you walk away, the pomegranate tree behind you rustling gently in the wind, you can't help but think of her future, not in years, but in tablets. When she's transferred, when her name appears on a receipt, when a child is born or sold, and whether, someday, someone will ask who she was. Which brings us to the final, quiet confrontation with Hammurabi's justice. Not in courtrooms or contracts, but in the moments where silence becomes the only defense and survival itself becomes an act of resistance. The shadow of the Stele stretches long over the plaza stones, cast by the afternoon sun that bakes the bricks and softens the edges of everything. You move through the crowd slowly, slipping between a woman haggling over garlic and a boy pushing a cart filled with cracked pottery. The Stele is just ahead, black, polished, towering over the people who barely glance at it anymore. You stop before it, head tilted, eyes scanning the rows of cuneiform etched deep into its face. These aren't just laws. They're declarations, boundaries, instructions for how to live and who gets to live comfortably. You've heard it said that justice is blind. But here, in Hammurabi's Babylon, justice sees everything, and it takes note of who you are. It sees your clothes, your accent, your name, your trade. It measures how much silver you own and what family you come from. It knows whether you're noble or common, free or bound, male or female, and it weighs your worth accordingly. The code does not pretend otherwise. In fact, it carves that hierarchy into stone. You've watched how those with wealth navigate the law like a well-mapped canal, knowing which turns will lead them clear of trouble. If they strike a servant, they pay a fine. If a servant so much as raises a hand to them, the servant may lose it. These aren't exceptions, they're clauses. Clause 202, Clause 203, Clause 204, each one reducing human behavior to a transaction, scaled up or down based on class. And the ones who wrote these laws didn't see the inequality as a flaw. They saw it as order. The scribe who works near the canal has copies of the code etched onto clay tablets, less poetic than the stele, but easier to carry. He loans them out for a fee. And always, he grins as he hands one over. It's all in there, he says, tapping the baked surface. The rules, plain and fair. But what he means is predictable, not just predictable. You saw that predictability last month, when a fisherman lost his boat during a storm. His lender refused to forgive the debt, citing Clause 48, which states that if a man owes a loan, and the harvest or trade is ruined by natural disaster, he still must repay, unless the king offers remission. The king didn't. The lender brought the fisherman to court. The judgment was swift. The man's sons were taken as payment, 3 boys, 2 strong enough to haul nets. one barely old enough to lift a reed mat. That was justice, carved clean. But the next day, another case unfolded. A noble's son, drunk and laughing, shattered an artisan's kill in a careless horse race. The kill was everything to the artisan, his living, his pride. The case went before the same judge. The noble paid a modest fine, less than the value of the kill, and no further action was taken. The artisan protested. The judge waved him off. That, too, was justice, also carved clean. You walk past the marketplace and into the district where homes lean in toward one another, their mud brick walls pocked with thumbprints and the occasional painted glyph. Here, justice has a different face. It's not issued with seals and scrolls. It's whispered over bread, settled with handshakes, or avoided altogether. People in this part of the city know better than to bring their troubles before the court, unless they absolutely must. They know the court is a place where language twists, where the law is a net some can swim through and others drown in. You pass a woman in the doorway of her home. She's brushing her daughter's hair and murmuring something soft. You don't know what the girl has done, but you can guess. There's a sadness in the woman's voice, not angry, just tired. Maybe the girl snuck food from the kitchen, or maybe she dropped a jar meant for the temple. If the matter escalates, if someone complains, if property is involved, she could be brought before the elders. And once you're before them, your story is no longer yours to tell. It becomes a matter of record. And yet, there's no sense of panic in her eyes, because they know how to handle these things among themselves. A gift of bread, a borrowed ox repaid in a season, a whispered apology with hands clasped. The code doesn't forbid kindness. It just doesn't require it. Historians still debate the function of the code's harshness. Was it meant to scare people into obedience? To protect order at all costs? Or was it, in its time, a step toward justice compared to the chaos before it? The argument sways back and forth like the reed boats on the Euphrates. But what you've seen is that the code doesn't always reach the places where real life happens. It doesn't see the girl who lied to protect her brother. It doesn't see the temple guard who turns a blind eye for a handful of dates. It doesn't see the scribe who quietly adds a few words to a contract, just enough to shift power from wife to husband, from worker to master. And still, people believe in it, or they pretend to. It's easier that way. Easier to say, it's the law, than to admit that sometimes law is just theater, that the Stele is more monument than manual, that true justice, fair, kind, human, exists in the silences between carved lines. You sit on the worn stone steps of a courtyard and watch the sun begin to drop. A boy runs past, laughing, chasing a dog with two big ears. Two merchants haggle over lentils, one waving his arms, the other rolling his eyes. A woman gives a fig to a child that isn't hers. And in these tiny moments, you see justice of another kind. Not carved, not signed, not weighed in silver, just lived. You think about the scribe again. He once told you that the code is like a wall. It keeps order inside and chaos out. But maybe the wall does more than that. Maybe it also divides. And maybe, just maybe, it hides the people on one side from seeing the pain of the other. And as the sky deepens into twilight and the torches begin to flicker along the temple roads, you feel the weight of the laws, less as words and more as presence. A structure, a silence, a shape that everyone moves around, whether they choose to or not. Because Hammurabi's justice was never just about crime and punishment. It was about control, about reminding everyone that there was a hand above them, holding a chisel. And now, with night falling and the last sounds of market life fading into quiet footsteps and low voices, you begin to prepare for sleep. Not your own, perhaps, but the city's. A slow, uneasy rest beneath stone laws and flickering stars. Which brings us, at last, to our quiet conclusion, a final walk beneath the fading light, where we'll let these echoes settle and let Babylon exhale. And that's where we'll leave it for tonight. From the dust-choked alleys of Babylon to the echoing chambers of ancient courts. From the trembling hands of farmers facing judgment to the polished sandals of kings who carved the rules. A long, quiet walk through the stone-set layers of one of history's oldest codes. If you're still awake, thanks for sticking with me all the way to the end. And if you drifted off somewhere between the missing oxen and the uneven punishments, that's perfectly fine too. That's kind of the whole point. If you enjoyed this slower, sleep-friendly dive into history, feel free to like the video and subscribe for more. And as always, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it was when you pressed play. It's always lovely seeing where in the world these late-night stories are finding their way. For now, I'll let the quartz fall silent, the styluses rest beside cooling clay tablets, and the torches burn low along the crumbling ziggurat walls. Sleep well, and I'll see you next time.